It was Christmas of the year 2000, a joyful time of merriment and good cheer because I knew that one of the boxes under that tree held the game that would set the tone for the next decade. The 90s was all about Mario, Final Fantasy, Zelda, and Pokemon. What would the new decade bring? It was more Mario, Final Fantasy, Zelda, and Pokemon. I tore through boxes upon boxes until at last I found it. A copy of a game that would change my life for approximately the next 4 hours before a terrible ice storm knocked out our electricity for the next 2 weeks and I was forced to obsessively read the game manual by candlelight instead. That game was none other than The Legend of Zelda Majora's Mask. Look, I loved Majora's Mask, but around my house the term Game of the Year had a meaning all of its own. So I sadly missed out on Ogre Battle that year. I remember being vaguely aware of Ogre Battle through some Nintendo Power magazine ads, but it just didn't grab me like other Powerhouse franchises did at the time. And so it was that Ogre Battle 64 slipped away from me, straying out of thought and time as I eventually moved on to the GameCube and other consoles of the future. And it didn't cross my mind again until I was researching for my Aidyn Chronicles video, and I kept seeing it at either number 1 or number 2 of most best RPG on the 64 lists, which is not that long of a list, but I'm sure you can guess where Aidyn Chronicles landed on all of those. So I decided to give it a shot and ended up playing through the entire game twice for different endings over the course of a month. And in so doing, I was introduced to a game that had a fantasy world so well crafted, with game mechanics so addicting that I just couldn't put it down. It took me a while to get the swing of things, but once I did, I quickly understood why the game had such high praise, and soon I was making plans to play other titles in the series as well. The backlog must grow. And don't let the cutesy pixel graphic art style of this game fool you like it did me. This game gets dark. As I poured more and more hours into the game, a question arose in my mind over and over again. What happened to this franchise? Square Enix currently owns the rights, but it was a Quest Corporation IP in the 90s. It had 3 very well-received games released that decade with March of the Black Queen, Tactics Ogre, and Ogre Battle 64. A highly rated Game Boy Advance title called The Knights of Lotus in 2001, as well as Ogre Battle Gaiden, Prince of Zenobia in the year 2000 for the Neo Geo Pocket Color. I've actually never heard of that. Tactics Ogre, which is still an immensely popular game in tactical RPG circles, has been remade twice, most recently as Tactics Ogre Reborn in 2022 for current generation consoles. But a game with an original story hasn't been made for this franchise since 2001, and from what I can tell, that's completely undeserved. As far as the timeline of the overall story goes, Ogre Battle 64 is the most current, so we have nothing narratively after that game, which really bummed me out because after seeing all the different endings and imagining where the story could go from there, I really wanted more. All that being said, whether you're a veteran of the series here to bask in some good old nostalgia, or a newcomer just here to satisfy your curiosity, I bid you to gather round, friends, and lend me your ears, for this is a tale of friendship and betrayal, of angels and demons, of war and revolution. My lords and ladies, it is my great honor to present to you here today Ogre Battle 64, Person of Lordly Caliber. Even if you've never heard of this game, you're probably more familiar with the Ogre Battle saga as a whole and its related titles than you might think. Led by game director Yasumi Matsuno, who also wrote the story for these games, developer Quest Corporation released the first game in the series in 1993, titled Ogre Battle: The March of the Black Queen for the Super Nintendo. It was later ported to the Sega Saturn and PlayStation systems as well. After leading development on a second game in the series titled Tactics Ogre Let Us Cling Together, Matsuno left the company to join Square, where he directed and wrote the critically acclaimed Final Fantasy Tactics. I won't get into it too much here, but his career alone is worth checking out if you want to look into it. But those first 2 games he directed were very different in style and gameplay, even though they took place in the same world. March of the Black Queen was an RTS RPG where you would direct different units across a battlefield in real time and then fight as you came into contact with enemy units. You would capture strongholds and make your way across the map until securing the final stronghold and winning that battle. The battles themselves took place automatically, meaning you wouldn't be scrolling through menus looking for magic or items when it was your turn. The units just use whatever attacks they have until the battle's over and you win or lose. Tactics Ogre was a tactical turn-based RPG where each stage was sectioned off into grids, and you could actually control every unit that was under your command and decide what each of them did with their turn. The battle maps feature different terrain types and also take elevation into account. If you've played Final Fantasy Tactics, you'll know what I'm talking about. Following his departure from the company, Quest Corporation would soon begin production on what they first called Ogre Battle 3, which would eventually be renamed to Ogre Battle 64, Person of Lordly Caliber. It was set to be very similar to March of the Black Queen. It was released in Japan in 1999, and they got the cool box art as is usually the case. In North America, Atlas handled the publishing, and it was released on October 5th of 2000, just a few weeks before Majora's Mask, to pretty favorable reviews across the board. Story-wise, Ogre Battle 64 is a sequel to the first game in the series, The March of the Black Queen, but it's set up in a way that can be completely understood by newcomers to the series. It's a self-contained story, but veterans of the first game definitely get an enhanced experience due to knowing the lore of the world, as well as the history of the Zenobian characters that cross over into the game. If you're new to the series, you might be thinking that the main antagonists are in fact ogres, large lumbering beasts akin to the cave trolls of Lord of the Rings, or swamp-inhabiting creatures who enjoy their privacy, hate donkeys, and enjoy listening to Smash Mouth. But you actually spend far more of your time battling against shitty, power-hungry humans. Ogres in this world are more akin to demons than how they're typically portrayed in most Western fantasy. You see, the world in Ogre Battle is split into three parts: the heavens, the earth, and the netherworld. In the far distant past, way before even the events of the first game, the humans of Earth were at war with the ogres and other denizens of the netherworld, but the humans were losing badly and were dangerously close to being wiped out completely. For this reason, the gods of the heavens decided to intervene. They sent an army of angels and other formidable beings to ally with humanity and push back the forces of the netherworld. They succeeded, sealing away the ogres behind chaos gates that could only be opened from the world of men. This epic clash of angels, humans, and demons is what eventually came to be known as the Ogre Battle. Unfortunately, after their world was saved, the humans returned to their barbaric ways and soon began warring against each other. This greatly angered the gods, who withdrew their forces to the heavens and swore never to help humanity again. If you'd like a more detailed overview of the mythos of Ogre Battle, as well as story summaries for other games in the franchise, you should definitely check out the Warren Report YouTube channel. Lots of great Ogre Battle content there. In the present day, the legendary tales of angels, ogres, and demons have faded into myth, at least in the minds of the general populace. The Holy Lotus Empire has risen as a powerful nation bent on spreading their religion of Lotusism across the continent, and it is here in the kingdom of Palatinus where the player character finds themselves at the start of the game. Palatinus is currently under the control of the Holy Lotus Empire to the northwest, after the Palladian king Procus Dulmare surrendered to them after suffering a few defeats in battle. He was able to reach an agreement that allowed him to remain on the throne, but the true power resides in Lotus. Part of this agreement meant that King Procus would have to impose the religion of the Lotus Empire on his own people, as well as install a new class system that further drove a wedge between the nobles and the working class citizens. I really thought this was going to be a traditional turn-based RPG when I first started playing, but to my surprise, the combat was resolved through auto-battling. I'm usually pretty leery of auto-battlers because so many of them are phone games that, while admittedly fun and addicting, usually have some kind of wall you hit that encourages you to spend money for more units in order to progress. I mean games like AFK Arena, Epic 7, stuff like that. But this game is both an RTS and an auto-battler in its purest form. And get this, all of the units are free. In Ogre Battle 64, you're in control of a young idealistic man named Magnus Gallant, who has been tasked with leading the southern division of the Palladian army against a growing army of rebels from the south. At the start of the game, you can name him whatever you wish, but to keep it simple, I'll refer to him as Magnus throughout the video. As the leader of a battalion of troops, it's up to you to successfully guide up to 10 groups to capture the enemy base while at the same time defending your own base. This seems simple at first, but gradually becomes more complicated as the game progresses. Over time, not only will the enemies get stronger, but they'll also attack in waves, gain the ability to fly, and start flanking around you after you've moved away from your base. You capture the enemy base and win the mission by defeating the leader of that base's squad. If Magnus dies, or your base is captured, you lose. Simple as that. But while the game is simple in concept, there's a steep learning curve for navigating the battle map and directing your troops. It's not a snappy, intuitive system that any random person can pick up in a battle or two. There's dispatching, choosing between moving to a location, enemy group, or a stronghold, or a mixture of all three at once. There's the fact that each unit has a specific terrain advantage that affects their speed and fatigue buildup across various types of terrain. There's specific stronghold commands where you can swap group members or even items. But thankfully there's a lengthy and in-depth tutorial that you can run through before you start a new game that will go over all of this with you. The person guiding the tutorial is a witch named Deneb, which is a character that appears in multiple other Ogre Battle games. So where did these troops come from? Well, at the beginning of the game, Magnus will be asked a series of questions, and the answers to those questions determine his starting army. There's actually a starting army calculator you can use online if you really want to go for a specific group. It was really useful on my second playthrough. Some of the soldiers you have are main characters like Dio, Leia, and Magnus himself. Outside of the units you promote yourself, there's lots of characters you can recruit to your army in this game that all have different requirements. Some won't join if you're too chaotic, and others won't join if you're too lawful, for example. As you journey around the map, there's a small chance your unit can run into a wild monster such as a fairy, a hellhound, or even a dragon. During battle, you can try and convince these creatures to join your army, but most of your battalion will be made up of characters that you promote from soldiers. The soldier is the base unit of the game. Win enough battles with these little dudes in your group, and they'll eventually be promoted into a fighter if the group is led by a male, or an Amazon if the group is led by a female. From here on out, promotion into another more powerful unit is gender-based. Fighters can become units like wizards, ninjas, paladins, and dark knights, and Amazons can become units like archers, witches, sorceresses, and clerics, for example. To promote at this point, the unit needs to meet these thresholds. 1, they have to have the right stats. 2, you have to either have a set of equipment for the unit you want them to become, or be able to purchase a set. And 3, they have to be of the right alignment necessary to promote into that unit. For example, a knight looking to promote into a paladin will need to have high enough stats, which increase with level, a set of rather expensive equipment including a balder helm, balder armor, and a blessed sword, and have a high enough alignment. A barbarian looking to become a black knight will need the right stats, equipment, and a low enough alignment. You could say that alignment between chaotic and lawful is the central theme of the whole game. It has a place in the story, combat mechanics, and sort of determines what ending you get at the end of the game, but in a different way. I'll explain more about that later. So how do you manage your character's alignments? Well, there are a few different ways alignment is affected. For example, fighting against lawful enemies and lower level enemies makes your alignment decrease, while fighting against chaotic enemies and higher level enemies makes your alignment increase. And you can actually check your character's rough alignment score on their character sheet. See these scales of justice here? They'll lean one way or another and have either a C, an N, or an L for chaotic, neutral, and lawful, respectively. There's also an elemental system composed of the 4 elements earth, air, fire, and water. Whatever element that character has an affinity for will do less damage to them, and if they have a weapon that is also of that element, it will do increased damage. But to be honest, I didn't pay much attention to this while I was playing. The characters end up getting so powerful that they just blow shit up, pretty much. It's not as strict of an elemental type system as, say, Pokemon or something you might find in a Final Fantasy game. The soldier promoting and squad building is really where all the fun of the game is. You're able to equip each character with different weapons, armor, shields, and spellbooks, all kinds of things to make them stronger. Some of these items you'll get from defeating enemy squads, but others can simply be found on the field map as you're exploring around, so it's worth it to send a few units around to try and find something good. But a lot of the items will simply be found on the roads in between strongholds, which is nice. So if you're into micromanaging every aspect of dozens of people's lives, like more than a few of my ex-girlfriends, then this is probably the game for you. And since this is a long and ongoing campaign, you're going to need to take care of your troops for the long haul. If one of them dies in battle and you don't resurrect them in time, they'll turn into a zombie and as a result won't be nearly as valuable. And the change into a zombie is irreversible. As you can see here, in my first playthrough when I had absolutely no idea how to play the game, I managed to collect 8 zombies. I even used them in some of my squads. And I didn't have the heart to let them go, so I basically just kept them chained up like that guy from Shaun of the Dead. Role-playing as a necromancer actually sounds like it would be pretty cool though. There's lots of unique ways to get different units in this game, some much more complicated than others, like the Angel Knight for example. These are so tricky to get that I had to yoink one of them from an enemy group using an item called Love and Peace, which you can only get so many of in the game. It's an item that lets you designate an enemy group to steal a member from, but the thing is, it can't be the leader of the group, and the member chosen is completely random. But this is a great way to get Angel Knights and also more Black Knights, since one of their equipment requirements, the Valiant Mantle, is a limiting factor. You can only get 3 legitimately in the game, I believe. To get an Angel Knight, a female character has to die in the last fight of a mission, and then she has a certain % chance to revive into an Angel Knight or turn into a zombie. So it's a pretty risky maneuver, but also an extremely cool mechanic. It was probably really exciting when people had no idea it could happen. Angel Knights will eventually level up into a Seraph, and their Jihad spell is a truly powerful sight to behold. Also, every unit you lose is another that you're going to have to train to replace them, which takes time. So it's very important to protect your people and keep them alive as long as possible. And honestly, since the units are randomly named and they stay in your army so long, you end up getting rather attached to them. Here's a breakdown of what battles are like. When you run into an enemy squad, you transition to the battle screen, which will change depending on what environment you're in. Your units can be arranged however you like on this 3x3 grid. For human-sized units, you can have up to 5, but if you have something like a hellhound or a griffin or a dragon, they're considered large units and will take up more space, which leaves room for less human-sized units. Each unit gets a certain amount of turns depending on what their class is, what level they are, and what row they are positioned in. They take turns using abilities automatically, but you can actually specify how you want your squad to attack. You can have them focus on the strongest enemy, the weakest, the leader, or have them attack on their own based on what makes the most sense for that unit. You will want them to attack the leader for an overwhelming amount of the time though. Once a leader is wiped out, that squad will wander around aimlessly, unable to do anything else. And you can choose to let them live or mercilessly slaughter them if you need the experience or the items. You may have noticed this timer here. After a certain amount of time, you'll be able to stop the battle and choose to flee. After a little more time, you'll be able to use a powerful Pedra attack if it's charged up. Pedras are elemental attacks that any group can use as you please, and each of them gets their power from one of the gods of the world, those being Harnella for wind, Zashanel for fire, Berta for earth, Gurza for water, Ishtar for virtue, and Asmodean for bane. You start with a free Pedra at the beginning of the game, and can collect more as the game goes on. Usually this doesn't work until later in the game when characters start having more turns and the battles actually last long enough for the Pedra to be usable. They actually get pretty powerful as the game goes on, but they do take time to recharge before you can use them again. You can collect up to 6 in the game, 4 to match the 4 elements, along with 2 for Bane and Virtue Magic, although those 2 require special quests to unlock. When everyone's finished with their turns, or one team or the other is wiped out, the battle ends. And if you don't like how long battles take, you can always turn off the attack and spell animations and increase the game speed to hurry things up if you wish. If there are units still left alive after all turns have been used, the team who did the most damage wins and the loser is pushed back a few paces on the battlefield. And you have to be careful about this because your group can be pushed into another enemy group and catch you completely out of position or almost dead. Positioning is key here. There's also a directional aspect to combat as well, denoted by these arrows you see here. If 2 squads run into each other face to face, the units will be in positions you originally placed them. But if an enemy squad runs into yours from behind, their positions will be reversed. Same thing if you run into someone from behind, or if they run into you from the side, the positions will be flipped horizontally. So it adds another interesting layer of complexity when deciding whether or not you want to try and run away. And if you get hit with a critical attack, that unit will actually move back a square, which can change the abilities it uses entirely depending on what class it is. Certain units have special properties that will help out other units if they're in the same group. A Beast Tamer will increase the damage done by monsters in the group like Hellhounds and Griffins. A Doll Master will increase the damage done by Golems. A Dragon Tamer will increase damage done by dragons. So depending on how you want to build your army, you could have immense use of these or hardly any use for them at all. They're decent fighters on their own, of course, but if you're short on monsters, dragons, or golems, you'd be better served just to turn them into another unit. But the princess is my favorite example of this, and definitely the most powerful. She takes a long quest line to unlock, and requires a female of high alignment, but if you manage to get one, you can make her the leader of a squad, and then every other member of that group will get an extra attack. Crazy powerful. I actually didn't know she had to be the leader for this to work, for an embarrassingly long amount of time. She also casts powerful AoE magic twice if you put her in the back row. Where you place your units can completely change what abilities they have and how many times they use them. For example, if you put a paladin in the front row, they'll attack a total of 3 times over the course of the battle. If you put them in the back row, they will heal instead. A Valkyrie will attack with a spear in the front row and cast lightning magic from the back row. Also, certain classes of spellcasters can combine for deadly combination attacks, and there's actually quite a few of them. How this works depends on what spellbook you have equipped on each unit, as well as how advanced the units are. For example, an Archmage and a Siren with fire spellbooks can combine for an attack called Firestorm Plus, which hits every enemy in the opposing group for massive damage. If one of them has Bane magic instead, they'll use an attack called Dark Flame, which hits everyone for massive damage but also has the added effect of powering down their stats as well. There are several combinations like this across multiple elements and units that you can experiment with. Before each mission, you'll get a strategic brief from Hugo, a wise old man who is well versed in military tactics. He'll give you the locations of the enemy-controlled bases and towns, as well as suggestions on how to attack. The red dots are enemy bases, the blue dots are areas you control, and the green dots are neutral towns. The big blue square is your home base, and the big red square is the enemy base. On the battlefield, things move in real time, so every second counts. Right off the bat, you can start dispatching your troops, and you control every aspect of what they do. You can have them head towards the nearest stronghold, tell them to wait in case an enemy squad approaches, or move them to any specific location that you wish. But you have to be careful not to try and move them too far at once. Each group has a certain amount of stamina noted by this flag here that will slowly fill up and turn red. If it fills up, the group will stop and camp for a little while to rest. This is where part of the strategy comes in because you really don't want a group to start combat while asleep. Some strongholds have shops where you can buy items to heal troops, restore stamina, or even cure petrification. And you're going to need a petrification cure once you find yourself against a group of vicious cockatrices. But don't worry too much. If you find yourself with a bunch of dead or petrified units, you can have a witch fix them up at a witch's den, but it will set you back some money. There's at least one located at one of the strongholds on every mission. And finally, there's a sort of hidden mechanic called the Chaos Frame, which is a pretty sweet name. This is not explained to you in-game at all. It's a score ranging from 0 to 100 that gets continuously calculated through the game based on decisions you make and whether or not you liberate or capture enemy strongholds. And you can never check what score you have, which can be quite nerve-wracking. This is what determines the ending you get, as well as some of the special characters you can recruit into your party. Basically, a low chaos frame gets you the bad ending. The medium and high chaos frame thresholds both give you what I would consider to be good endings. It just changes the events that happen slightly. You honestly don't have to look at the endings as strictly good or bad though. It makes more sense to think of them as the chaotic ending, the neutral ending, and the lawful ending in my opinion. And I'll go through and explain all of those later. But anyway, you'll be asked to make certain decisions in the game that will either lower or raise the chaos frame, and it's not always very obvious which of the choices will do that. Sometimes the mission path will branch and you'll have to make a choice of which one to do first. This can raise or lower the chaos frame depending on what path you choose. But the main way you can control the chaos frame is by capturing or liberating enemy strongholds. Capturing them lowers it and liberating raises it. But it's something you have to pay careful attention to. You see, each stronghold has a certain morale score ranging from 0 to 100. To liberate a town and raise your chaos frame, a squad with an average alignment that is generally close to that stronghold's morale must take it over. If the average alignment and the morale of the stronghold are not close enough, the stronghold will be captured and the chaos frame will decrease. You'll know whether you captured or liberated because the squad leader will yell it out, which is nice. I really grew to love the combat system more than I thought I would. At first, I wasn't impressed by the auto-battling nature of the fights, but you still have enough decision-making power to feel like you're actively involved. And the decisions the AI makes are mostly what I would choose to do anyway. Still, I would have preferred being able to control every character for every attack they had every single time. And yes, I know how long that would take. But even so, still a very fun system. Even though it's an auto-battler, you have an absurd amount of agency. You can run with 10 squads or 5. You can have lots of beasts and dragons or just level up human units. And since it's an RTS, there's always something going on. Once you build your army up and start getting to the more complicated maps, you'll really have your hands full keeping track of your army and making quick decisions on where to send them. The real fun is in the roleplay of what kind of army you want, and the attachment you get to certain units that stay with you through the whole game. So when Clyde the fighter goes down in combat, it's not just some nameless red shirt. You're like, God damn it, we lost Clyde! And then you rush to the nearest witch's den to revive him. And the difficulty of the game is married to how you take care of your army. If you keep everyone alive, keep their equipment up to date, and promote them as soon as possible, the game is actually pretty easy. In fact, if you have the squad's attack style set to attack the leader, you'll often kill the mission boss in a single round because they're usually exposed in the middle. But if you let a bunch of units die or turn into zombies or don't try and build at least a few strong groups, you're going to have a bad time. There are missions where you can get overwhelmed very quickly, but overall I had a really fun time with the combat and there's way more than enough unit variety to keep things interesting on multiple playthroughs. Ogre Battle 64 employs a very distinctive sprite-based art style that gives it a unique look compared to other games on the 64. The character models are actually rendered in 3D and then converted into sprites in a similar process to what Rare did for Donkey Kong Country on the Super Nintendo, as well as the characters in the Golden Sun series when they actually go into battle. The attack animations are simple but communicated very effectively and you can really feel the weight of them, especially with critical hits, which have this really nice zooming in effect. And the closer you look, the more detail you'll find. See how the grass moves as if being blown by the wind? Same thing with shop signs and character cloaks as they're walking. The shadow details are quite nice as well, following characters around naturally and never seeming out of place. I really like the trails of light left behind after units swing their swords or axes, and the sound design helps sell the effects tremendously. The background environments have a noticeable blur even if you try to artificially enhance the resolution past what the 64 was capable of, but never to the point of distraction, and the game certainly isn't ugly by any means. Though admittedly, and I'll say this time and time again, I rarely give a shit about the graphics if a game is fun enough. The character sprites convey a serviceable amount of emotion in cutscenes, but it's the music and writing that really carry the atmosphere. The music is very deliberate and expertly placed, and since there are so many backgrounds that are reused and areas that get revisited throughout the game, it almost feels like you're in a theater watching a play or something. It's a very emotional game, and the music tracks waste no time setting the mood for any given scene. ponderous, threatening, hopeful. There are dozens of moments where a character will arrive and the bad guy music will start playing, which is honestly hilarious to me. It's one of my favorite things about RPGs. The game is often steeped in high drama and tense scenarios. Not to say that there aren't moments of levity, but they are few and far between, and the stakes are constantly rising as the story unfolds. The story in this game can take several different paths depending on certain choices made throughout your playthrough, and also which characters you choose to recruit. And I'll be sure to make note of the big choices as they come along. Just one note before I begin the story section, what I'm about to tell you concerning the Progenitor and how the Lotus Empire came to be in control of Palatinus isn't explained to you when you start a new game. Instead, it plays out in two separate cutscenes on the main menu, but only if you don't move the control stick or press any buttons for a while. That was a fairly common practice back in the day, but this information is very critical to understanding world affairs when the game starts, and I think it should have been played as soon as you start a new game instead. And to be fair, it's probable that this information was in the game booklet, which I didn't have access to. Nitpicking aside, let's continue. Long ago, when gods walked among men, there lived a people called the Oryx, who were cherished by the earth goddess Berta, and a man known as the Progenitor. With the power of a god, he drove away the Indigans and reclaimed the Heartlands. The Oryx rejoiced in the victory of their mighty king, while the Indigans bowed down to their new ruler. So reads the legend of the Progenitor, as recorded in the history of Palatinus, and his descendants have ruled ever since. Here's something I want you to think about as the story unfolds. If the Progenitor was just a man, how did he acquire the power of a god? What would you need to do to gain such power? What would you need to sacrifice? Before we get to the prologue, I'm going to briefly explain the current state of world affairs as they are when the game begins. The Holy Lotus Empire is a religious and military superpower. Their leader, Pope Saldian, came into power through a coup that saw the Lodician king overthrown, and since then he's ordered a series of crusades across the continent to spread their religion and subjugate the conquered. They believe in one all-powerful god called Filler, and claim all other gods are actually avatars of him, so they condemn religions like birthism, which is practiced by the kingdom of Palatinus. So Lotus sends an enormous force of knights called the Brigade of Radiant Cross across the continent, killing, converting, and enslaving as they go. They conquer the kingdom of Nerdam, home of the Bulmakans, or the Nirdames as they are also called, and they are enslaved. And seeing the might of Lotus, King Procus of Palatinus surrendered to them, effectively transforming the nation into a puppet kingdom. As I briefly mentioned earlier, this involved adopting the religion of Lotusism as well as implementing the Lotus class system. However, there was great resistance in both the southern and eastern regions, and for the next decade after the peace treaty was signed, tensions would rise, the people would grow bolder, and whispers of revolution circled among the so-called lower class. Upon starting a new game, a cutscene set 6 years in the past begins playing with our main character Magnus and a silver-haired young boy named Prince Yumel having a conversation about Magnus's impending departure to a military academy. Magnus is the son of a man named Ankaseth, a former military hero, and they are both noble upper-class citizens of Palatinus. Prince Yumel is the youngest of King Procus's 2 sons, and he and Magnus are close friends. The musical track accompanying the scene is titled Alone, and I consider it to be Yumel's theme, as it is often played during his time on screen. It's a beautifully haunting arrangement that grows in melancholic power as the story unfolds, and it really reminds me of A Time for Us from the old Romeo and Juliet movie, especially the beginning. And I mean the old one from 1968, not the new old one from 1996. In this scene, Magnus explains that he's going to the military academy because he can't stand being around his father, and also so that he can learn to stand on his own and protect both of them. He promises to make Yumel proud and leaves. In the present day, Magnus is now a graduate of the Ishka Military Academy, and here we are treated to one of the coziest RPG tracks I've ever heard, Fortune Teller 2. I've had it playing through some of the video already, but just bask in it for a moment. It's the perfect start of a new adventure song, and honestly it makes me kind of emotional listening to it. If I could sum up my feelings about it in 2 words, they would just be simpler times. But anyway, Magnus is seen here meeting with Archbishop Odoron, where it's tradition for new graduates to complete their training by swearing an oath to Mother Bert, the goddess of earth. Then you get to name your character whatever you want, but like I said earlier, I just stuck with Magnus. You also get to pick your birthday, which actually does matter. You see, Time passes in Ogre Battle every time you move across the map between missions, even if you don't actually play them. A year is 15 months, and for every year that passes you can trigger a birthday event by going to the Hugo report on the world map, which grants you a new item. Every 10th birthday up to level 99 gets you a unique item that can't be obtained anywhere else in the game, and some of them are very powerful. For this reason, one of the meta strategies is to just run around at the beginning until you're 99 years old so you can get all the good items. Luckily, this has no effect on the plot, though it would be very funny if it did. The Archbishop then proceeds to ask a series of really cool personality quiz questions like, "What dost thou hold within thy sword?" and "What shalt thou rid from this land?" The answers to these questions actually determine your starting army, which I didn't know on my first playthrough because I went in completely blind. If you really want, you can find a starting army calculator online that will get you the battalion of your dreams. But you won't be locked out of any special units here, so don't worry about that. You can also get your first Pedra here, and you can choose between 4 different elements, and then the opening credits roll. You may notice that it says Ogre Battle Episode 6, and that's because the first game in the series, The March of the Black Queen, was actually Episode 5, with prequel episodes supposed to come out later. I'm guessing Yasumi Matsuno was a Star Wars fan. As of now, these prequel games do not exist. The next few scenes show Magnus's journey to Akka Castle. Notice the little details here like their hair and cloaks flowing in the wind. The story is divided up into a prologue, 3 chapters, and then a final chapter, each having a special message at the beginning of each one. Prologue. Casting their gaze on the ground, trudging along. Southern region, Akka Castle. Personnel assignment ceremony. Here you meet General Godslaus, who plays the role of a roughly middle-aged military man to perfection. He gives a speech about how there will be no slacking off under his command, then sends you all on a training exercise. But before that, Magnus meets with a gray-haired old military tactician named Hugo. Hugo is to be your advisor before each mission and will be a very familiar face throughout the game. But just as quickly as Magnus arrives, he's dismissed, with Hugo telling him he's already known about Magnus for quite some time. As Magnus exits, a young man named Diomedes enters and quickly disrespects Hugo, calling him a fossil. Diomedes is one of the main characters, and his fate has multiple outcomes depending on certain decisions you make throughout the game. In the next scene, he's shown to have a quick temper and insists on being called Dio. After he calms down, Hugo starts detailing the mission for you. Apparently, there's a mine where workers are being attacked by bandits and wild beasts, and this is your first introduction to the briefing that takes place before every mission. He takes a little time going over strongholds and tactics like I explained earlier in the video. Afterward, Magnus is given command of the battalion, much to Dio's dismay. He demands that Magnus meet him outside to settle things one-on-one. You see, Dio is actually a low-born citizen of Palatinus. He thinks that Magnus was just handed the leadership position due to his noble status, and I mean, maybe he was. This is one of the decisions that determines Dio's fate later in the game. In my first playthrough, I chose to fight him, which later can lead to him leaving your army and becoming an enemy later on. If you choose not to fight, he has the option to stay depending on another decision made in the future. I love how there's already been a lot of agency in the game, even this early on. First with the starting army questionnaire, and now with this interaction with Dio. Really good RPG stuff so far. But no matter what you choose, Hugo will come out and break things up. And then it's time for your first mission. So what I usually do at the beginning is just dispatch every single group I have, even if they're not going to leave the base. It's good to have at least a few groups there just in case an enemy group slips by and tries to backdoor you. The first group you run into has a wizard and a barbarian that seem to be surprised at the Southern Division's sudden arrival, but they're definitely scheming something. The barbarian says to buy as much time as possible and then scampers off. As you can see in my first fight here, I had no idea what I was doing with unit formations. I had Magnus in the back row where he should be in the front, and I had archers in the middle when they should be in the back. I also had the AI set to attack however they wanted instead of directing them to the leader. Not to say any of this is inherently wrong, it's just very unoptimized and more likely to get Magnus or other units killed. And I hope you like this battle music because you're going to hear it a lot. I actually quite like it. It commands just the right amount of suspense and isn't grating on the ears. If you want, you can choose to go inside any stronghold and talk to the townspeople there. Mostly you get a little bit of game lore, but sometimes you get rewarded with side quests, some of which unlock very powerful classes for your units. I'll explain those as they become relevant. Once Magnus's group makes it to the main enemy base, he finds Stabilo, the man who was controlling the beasts attacking the mine. Magnus questions the man's motives, who simply says they were doing it for freedom, which I completely understand as a red-blooded American. Then the battle commences and I immediately lose because I started the fight with 8 hit points on Magnus. Quick tip, don't put group leaders in the center row without anyone in front of them. The enemy AI tends to attack that row like 70% of the time, so put them off to either side instead. That goes for any unit you really don't want getting hit that much. Eventually Dio's group won the mission for me. Magnus starts questioning Stabilo, and then Dio arrives to tell him the prince has been attacked. That would be Prince Yumel, the young silver-haired boy from the opening cutscene of the game. Stabilo then goes into an evil genius rant detailing the revolution's plan to overthrow the nobles and bring change to the kingdom. He says that he was merely a decoy to get the Southern Division's attention. Afterward, Magnus, Dio, and Hugo decide to go rescue the prince since they are the closest division. In the next scene, Hugo explains that they know Prince Yumel is being held at one of these towns, but they don't know which one. Spoiler alert, it's this one right here. If you have Magnus's unit go to this town, he will appear in the cutscene. Otherwise, it will be whatever group leader you have. The rebels have Prince Yumel, a knight named Raid, and a black knight named Jill tied up. Raid is basically the Sid Highwind of this game, except he doesn't have a good side. You know he's bad because he says lots of swear words. He's also the character with the most relatable hairline. Raid berates Magnus for taking too long to get there, and Prince Yumel seems to recognize him. Raid then commands Magnus to go and kill all of the rebels nearby. Magnus seems hesitant to do this, but Raid assures him that complete destruction of the rebels is necessary for the safety of the kingdom. He backs up his words shortly after by killing a defenseless rebel trying to flee the room. Yumel is disgusted with the act. The final boss here is Cad, a Beastmaster. He claims that the rebels are going to create a land where there is no class system and everyone has equal rights. That certainly sounds like a pretty good deal. Once he's defeated, Magnus decides to let him live despite what Raid commanded him to do earlier. Then, one of my fighters, Valentine, turns into a zombie. This is what happens when you let a unit die and you don't resurrect them at a witch's den before the end of a mission. After the battle, Magnus has Cad restrained as Yumel, Raid, and Jill show up. Raid is confused as to why this rebel is still alive, and Magnus, ever the young idealist, says he believes it would be beneficial for the kingdom to listen to what the rebels have to say. Raid balks at this notion, calling the rebels low-class scum, who only complain about their own lives and don't consider the future of the kingdom. He then proceeds to kick the defenseless rebel multiple times while he's down until Prince Yumel commands him to stop. Jill then tells Yumel to stand back and watch as Cad is executed. Magnus moves to stand in the way, and Raid comically slaps him to the side. Prince Yumel cries out in opposition, but before Raid can kill the man, he's stopped by a magnificently long-haired and quite handsome stranger with a purple cloak. "You call yourself a knight," the man says. Then a woman runs up and sets Cad free. After that, a man approaches Jill from behind, dodges his axe blow, blocks the next attack with his sword, and calls out for a man named Sevoran, who appears and casts a blinding white light while they all make their escape. This group of badasses would be familiar to anyone who played the first game, The March of the Black Queen. The man with the red headband and his hair tied back is Destin Feroda, the canonical protagonist of the first game. You can actually pick the name and gender of that character, but for continuity purposes, they went with Destin as the official main character. The long blonde-haired man who fought Raid is Cass Debonair, also known as Debonair the Wind. The woman who untied the rebel is Aisha, and the old man who blinded everyone was Saradin. All of these are characters that could be recruited by Destin if he made certain choices. They're all citizens of Zenobia, a country to the south that opposed the evil empress and the sage Rashidi from the first game. And now they have heard the plight of the Palladian rebels and come to their aid. All of these characters can be recruited by Magnus if you make certain choices and have a high chaos frame, but for now they end up escaping, with Yumel lamenting the fact that he was powerless in this situation. Afterward, since the rebel leader they were after escapes, the military finds a fall guy and publicly executes him instead. This did not sit well with the citizens of Palatinus, rebel or otherwise. This actually intensified the rebels' efforts and only served to give more legitimacy to their cause. Look at these people. They're out here with pots and pitchforks and brooms and shit. And so the conflict escalates. Chapter 1. Unable to turn back, speechless and itinerant. Back at Akka Castle, Magnus meets up with General Godislas once again. The general is growing concerned about the efficiency at which the rebel army is operating, hitting multiple targets across the kingdom at once. Due to his performance 1 month out of the academy, Godislas makes Magnus a captain in the Southern Division and officially gives him his own battalion. He makes a point to let Magnus know that his sympathy for the rebels will not be tolerated further, and then dismisses him. Magnus's next orders are to take Fort Tuatha in Crennel Canyon. Before the mission, you are introduced to Leia, who joins your battalion with some troops of her own. Her class is called Rune Knight, but she's basically a Valkyrie. She attacks with her spear in the front row and casts lightning from the back row. Her father is a nobleman who owns land up north, and her and Dio don't get along very well, shockingly. Also at this point, you get to name your own battalion. Since the game released in 2000, I decided to go with a stupid name I might have come up with back then, so I went with the Sex Havers with a Z. At the time, I didn't realize how much the name of the battalion was going to be used in dialogue, but what's done is done. Sex Havers, Hugo says. We must strive to do our best and be true to our name. The boss for Colonel Canyon informs you that the rebels were brought together by a man named Frederick Raskin, and that they will heretofore be known as the Palatinian Revolutionary Army. She says the time is over for the royal family, the nobles, and the upper class to live comfortably. When confronted about the possibility of hurting innocent people along the way, she basically says the revolution will not be televised, the revolution will be live. She says no person is unaffected, they just feign ignorance. It's really a shame that we have to kill this traitorous bitch. But once she goes down, she starts a sort of comedic running trend through the rest of the game where the boss you kill dies and then they manage to barely eke out some final words before collapsing. In this case, she tells Magnus that he has a noble heart and to be true to himself. That's nice. Hugo appears to relay to you the new orders, and there are 2 missions you can choose between. One is to escort Prince Yumel through Mylesia, and the other is to do a sweep of the Zenobian border to the south. At this point, Magnus is starting to sympathize more with the rebel cause, realizing that people wouldn't be out here sacrificing their lives if their day-to-day lives weren't truly terrible. The choice between the next 2 missions is kind of interesting. According to a Chaos Frame guide that someone made several years ago, if you go to Mylesia to escort Prince Yumel first, your Chaos Frame will drop by 10. If you go to the Zenobian border first, your Chaos Frame will not change at all. Aren't hidden mechanics fun? In my first playthrough, I went to Mylesia first. As soon as you move there, a flashback cutscene plays showing Magnus's father Ankaseth killing a man who tried to assassinate Prince Yumel 6 years ago. Magnus was there at the time and was injured during the altercation. Now, this is kind of a mysterious and shady situation here because instead of being hailed as a hero, Ankaseth was branded as nothing more than a cold-blooded murderer. He never admitted that the man he killed was going to assassinate Yumel, something that gets confirmed in the flashback when Magnus asks him why he wouldn't tell them the truth. Something is definitely cooking here. At Mylesia, the goal is to escort Prince Yumel across the plains to the western region. He has a group of 4 Black Knights with him which are very strong and tanky units. Black Knights are a limited unit because they require an item called the Valiant Mantle which you can only get 3 of without cheating in the game. The only other way to get them is through the Love and Peace item which I explained earlier. After the briefing, Dio questions Magnus about his relationship with the prince. Look at this smooth-ass power slide that he pulls off here. That is a work of art. Magnus tells Dio that the prince was a childhood friend, and then leaves. This is also the first mission where you can recruit a new character. If you go to the town of Elgoria, a young boy named Troy will approach you wanting to join your army. If you bring him back here after the mission, his mom will give him a family heirloom, the Hallowed Shield, which protects the wearer from status effect changes. Very useful item, and you can give it to whoever you want. Once you reach Zontak, the final boss, he'll tell you of their plan to kill Prince Yumel right then and there. He almost got his wish, because I failed to kill him with Magnus and then Yumel's group got to him right after that. Yumel says there must be a peaceful solution, to which Zontak replies, "Peaceful solution, my ass." That's kind of funny. Zontak says the royalty of Palatinus has been anything but peaceful to the lower class, and Yumel has his, "Wait, are we the baddies?" moment. In his defense, what do the second sons of kings usually know about lower class affairs? Anyway, Magnus's group ends up taking Zontak down. He sputters a few dying words about failing to kill the prince, and then collapses onto the ground. I think it's good to note here that to beat the mission, you don't have to wipe out the entire last enemy base. You can just kill the leader, and the rest of them will drop what they're doing and give up. And since I'm a total pro, Anderson and Hannah both turned into zombies at the end of the mission. Still had no idea I could avoid this at this point in time. I was just flying blind, having the time of my life, losing a soldier every other fight. Afterward, Magnus and Yumel finally get a chance to talk. He thanks Magnus for everything he's done for him so far, noting how he treats him differently now than when they were young. Yumel asks why he enlisted in the Southern Division, saying he could have joined the Central Division instead, where the capital is located. He gets upset, asking why he didn't come back after graduating. Magnus says he was tired of the Central region, that he wanted to see the world with his own eyes and learn more about himself, and that was the only reason. Yumel asks Magnus to come with him. After his recent tour of the South, Yumel has come to understand how poorly the lower class are really treated. He says he didn't realize how much they hated the nobles. "I want power," Yumel says. "The power to change the kingdom." He asks Magnus to lend him his strength. At this, Magnus grows frustrated, and his disgust for this campaign against the rebels boils over. "What can we do? What could we have done at the mine?" he says. "We can't do anything." And he's right to question that. They're just 2 very young men near the bottom of a chain of command that goes all the way to the top of the Holy Lotus Empire. Yumel agrees that he has no power, but that one day he will change the kingdom and the entire world, even if they call him a traitor, even if he has to fight against his father and brother. He says he will do anything to bring peace. "When that time comes, Magnus, I want you to be by my side. I want you to be my knight." This is one of the most powerful scenes in the game and incredibly romantic. At this point, if you're new to the series, you're probably thinking, "Hey, wait a minute, Where the fuck are all the ogres? Patience, my friends. The forces of evil are waiting in the wings, and will have their time on the stage. Next, it's time to do that sweep of the Zenobian border. The final boss of this stage is none other than Debonair. So, you belong to the sex havers, he says. Debonair doesn't want to fight, but he can't let us through. You can take him down to 0 hit points and win the fight, but he doesn't actually die. In the cutscene afterward, he says Magnus is very strong and that he's no match for him alone. And suddenly, a bald, bearded man named Gilbert appears out of nowhere. He's also a character from March of the Black Queen. Gilbert reveals that their plan was to delay the army and get some refugees to Zenobia, and with that, Gilbert and Debonair peace out. Determined not to let them escape, Magnus chases after them, alone apparently, until he runs into Destin, Saradin, and Aisha instead. Magnus demands to know what the Zenobians' intentions are with the war in Palatinus, but Destin knows about how Magnus defended the rebels and refused orders to kill them earlier. Saradin says that they've been watching the whole kingdom for months, that they know everyone is fighting everyone, and the Holy Lotus Empire is pulling the strings. Magnus then correctly surmises that the Zenobians are planning to use the revolutionary army to attack Lotus once the kingdom of Palatinus is overthrown. He's incredibly frustrated at this because he thinks that there's still hope for Palatinus as a kingdom, and here are these foreigners stoking the fires of revolution in his country in an effort to further their own agenda against the Lotus Empire. It's a fascinating conflict of interests between two groups of characters that are all seemingly good people, and these moral dilemmas will continue throughout the story. Before leaving, Saradin says to Magnus, "I see that you're troubled. Is it your lack of ability to deal with the situation, or is it the disparity between reality and your ideals?" Back at Akka Castle, Magnus is summoned to a meeting with General Godislas and Raid. He is told that Frederick Raskin, the leader of the revolution, is preparing an attack to recapture the Volmus mine and that he will be there himself. Magnus is ordered to head there and meet the revolutionary army in battle, and Raid jokes with him that he shouldn't worry because he won't have to capture any troops this time. As the mission starts, a cutscene with Godislas plays where he is being informed that the revolutionary army has suddenly captured several strongholds at once due to the help of traders in the Southern Division. Only a few lands remain uncompromised in the south, but Godislas is confident that if Magnus and the Sex Havers can kill Frederick Raskin, that the revolution will be done for. Once Magnus fights his way through the battle, he comes face to face with Frederick for the first time. He asks if Magnus is from the Southern Division before one of the troops begs him to escape, and shortly after the battle begins. Now this is still my first playthrough, and I decided for some reason that showing up to this fight with only Magnus in the back row, one fighter and one archer, was a good idea. It took about 5 tries with 3 different groups before I got the leader down. If you decide to play this, and you never have, don't be like me. Take care of your army. Take care of your troops. Get them home safe. After the battle, Friddick and Swift turned into zombies. 2 more for my undead army. Should have named my character Arthas and committed to a full Lich King run. Actually, I'm going to write that down. That's a good idea. After a successful mission, Magnus now has Frederick captured and bound with rope, but he doesn't seem to be taking it too hard. He asks Magnus why he looks so glum. Magnus says that he hates himself and his part in this war, that he feels like he's just been floating through life, and he isn't even sure if he's here by his own will. Frederick says living according to your own desires is difficult, and that letting life guide you is only one way of living. Suddenly, Dio shows up to herald the arrival of Raid and Godislas. Godislas congratulates Magnus on a job well done, and Raid laughs and condemns Frederick to death, asking if he has any last words. Frederick says the revolution will continue to live on as long as the kingdom is corrupt, and that someone will rise to take his place should he be killed. "You ain't nothing but a piece of shit," Raid replies. What a charming and enlightened man. He then tells Magnus to kill Frederick. After Magnus is hesitant to do so, Raid tells him that he has traitor's blood just like his father, Ankeseth the Murderer, which is an epithet that we haven't heard yet. Godislas then tries to explain to Magnus that the revolution is the source of the chaos in Palatinus. He tells him to execute Frederick and end the war, and this is a huge story-defining decision you make here. If you chose to fight Dio at the beginning of the game, and then choose to say nothing here, then Dio will leave the battalion and reappear as an enemy later in the game. This also locks you out of recruiting any of the Zenobians. If you choose the "I can't do it" dialogue, he will stay in the battalion for the rest of the game. In this playthrough, I chose not to say anything, and instead Dio says that he will kill Frederick. So Raid throws Dio his sword to finish the job. He tells Magnus not to get in the way, then he cuts the ropes free of Frederick and tells them both to run. I have to admit, I was stunned by this. I thought this was Dio's heel turn moment for sure. I thought he was going to kill him. Frederick and Magnus make their escape, with Magnus now labeled a traitor to the kingdom of Palatinus. So the choice he's been wrestling with since first encountering the Revolutionary Army has been made. He is also followed in his defection by Leia, Hugo, and luckily the rest of his battalion that you've spent the whole game training up. Depending on what decisions you've made with Dio thus far will determine whether or not he shows up here too. If you fought him, he won't come. If you didn't, he will make his grand reappearance after Hugo and Leia arrive. Magnus then asks Frederick if they can join the Revolutionary Army, and he accepts them. Frederick wants the Sex Havers to act as a mobile force, meaning the battalion will be separated from the rest of the army for their first few missions. Before their first battle as members of the Revolutionary Army at Gunther Piedmont, Magnus questions Hugo about whether or not he thinks the Revolution trusts them yet, which is a fair thing to consider. I would think it pretty suspicious if a sizable chunk of the enemy force suddenly swapped sides, even if the commander had a reputation for sparing rebels and sympathizing with the cause. So sending them off on their own special missions makes sense to me. Before the battle, Hugo mentions rescuing a man who could be a real help to the cause named Aznabel Baral, aka the Iron Hammer of Palatinus. Kinda sounds like a professional wrestler. Hugo says he used to know the man and that he would be a high-ranking officer now if he hadn't rebelled against Lotus in the past, but he doesn't give up any more information than that. Hugo then reveals that he used to fight alongside Magnus's father, Ankaseth. He says he knows Ankaseth used to be Prince Yumel's bodyguard, that Magnus and Yumel used to be close friends, and that he knows what really happened during the incident. I told you something shady was going on. Anyway, after the mission starts and you liberate the town of Kays, a young girl will appear asking you to help Aznabel. Apparently, he was recently arrested for contacting the Revolutionary Army. The young girl, whose name is Katreda, turns out to be Aznabel's daughter, and she's another character you can recruit. She's a cleric and was a godsend for me at this point because I actually didn't have any healers. Not that a healer would have saved my abysmal group composition and just the general state of my army overall, but you play, you get punished, you lose, and you learn. The important thing is to never go hollow. The last boss here will taunt you and call you a traitor, but he goes down easy despite having a formidable group of barbarians and wizards. See how easy it is to win when the leader is right in the middle. Anyway, once you win and reunite Aznabel and Katreda, the Iron Hammer will join your army. He tells Magnus that he also used to know his father, but doesn't offer up any more details other than, it's an old story. These old heads sure have been pretty vague about their past so far. I wonder why that is. Before the start of Mission 8, a cutscene with General Godeslas and a strange blonde-haired knight named Sir Baldwin that we haven't seen before takes place. Baldwin is a member of the Caligulus Order, one of the military branches of the Lotus Empire, and he's here to check up on the state of the war. He notes that the southern region is in terrible condition, and offers Godeslas a way to quickly end the revolution and redeem himself in the eyes of Lotus. He then produces a strange fruit for Godeslas to eat. He says it will offer him power, though there are risks involved. Then the seed fades to black. The next scene shows Magnus and Hugo having a meeting with Destin and Saradin. This is the first meeting where they are all on the same side. Magnus apologizes for his behavior during their previous meeting, and the two quickly come to an amicable resolution. Destin wants Magnus and the Sex Havers to cut off the reinforcements that are heading to Akka Castle, while his forces begin the assault on Akka Castle. During this mission, a cutscene will play showing ogres assaulting Central Division soldiers and revolutionary soldiers alike. And then one of the first enemy groups you run into is made up of an ogre and a few goblins. So ogres are in fact in Ogre Battle. Confirmed. But what has brought their appearance? Aren't they supposed to be denizens of the Netherworld? Time will tell. I actually had a really rough time with this mission. I was here for over 2 hours, and by the end of it I lost 2 more soldiers, who both turned into zombies. Once you beat Ariosh, the final boss of the mission, Magnus and Destin will interrogate him about the monsters they saw. When Ariosh is not forthcoming, Destin says he can't be sure if the monsters were indeed ogres, but the feeling he got when close to them, the infernal aura, he calls it, was familiar to him. Infernal aura is the vocab word of the day. After this, Ariosh admits that General Godeslas gave some people that mysterious fruit from earlier, and those who consumed it burst from the inside and became ogres. Magnus can't believe what he's hearing, showing how the legend of the great ogre battle of the past has faded into myth. The next mission is an assault on Akka Castle itself. Now at this point no one knows that Baldwin, the knight from Lotus, is the one who gave General Godeslas the fruit of the Netherworld that turned those people into ogres. So when the ogres started slaughtering reinforcements from the Palatinus Army's Central Division, they cut off ties with the Southern Division completely in order to separate themselves out of fear of the Lotus Empire. Remember that Lotus runs a strict religious regime, and if they found out Palatinus was using monsters from the Netherworld, it could be very bad for their king. But the fact that a high-ranking knight from Lotus is actually the one who introduced the means to bring about these ogres is, well, in reality, it's awful. But as far as the story goes, it was very exciting, very intriguing. This is when things really started to get interesting and pick up for me story-wise. There's no messing around in this mission. You just take your best groups and go straight up the gut. Afterward, Godeslas gets the news that he was branded as an insurgent. Then Baldwin makes an appearance to mock him for his failures, and then it's revealed that Godeslas sacrificed his own family for the power of the ogres, which means that the people he gave the Netherworld fruit to that burst apart and turned into those creatures were in fact his own family members. Holy shit. I really didn't expect such a dark turn from this game. Baldwin says that giving Godeslas the fruit was merely a test to see what power a man of his level of ambition could achieve. He tells him to channel his rage into fighting back against the revolutionary army, and then leaves. Once Godeslas confronts Magnus, a strange purple aura envelops him. He lets out a battle cry, and the fight for Akka Castle begins, and then it ends in 3 hits. This is how most of the boss battles go when they set up right in the middle. After Godeslas goes down, you can hear the cheers of the people. Frederick arrives to congratulate Magnus, and Magnus questions once again whether his actions so far have been right. The conflict continues to escalate, especially with the arrival of these newfound horrors from the Netherworld. Frederick tells Magnus to listen to the cheers, and that should set his heart at ease. With the defeat of Godeslas and the capture of Akka Castle, the entire southern region has now been liberated. In the cutscene between chapters, you are told that the Holy Lotus Empire has ordered King Procus to destroy the revolutionary army. He sent orders to the eastern and western divisions to mobilize, but only the west has answered. The eastern region is actually run by what's called the Eastern Orthodox Church, run by Archbishop Odoron, who you may remember from the beginning of the game. He's the one who gave you the personality quiz. In that region, they still practice what's called Birthism, the old official religion of Palatinus before Lotus came into power. They worship the goddess Bertha, and she will be important later on. 2 months later, Prince Yumel is made a general of the Western Division, and a battle with the Revolutionary Army is known to be imminent. Chapter 2. In a world shrouded in darkness, no path can be found. This quote at the start of Chapter 2 reminds me of the opening of Dante's Inferno, which, depending on what version you have, could read, "Midway through the journey of our life, I found myself within a forest dark, for the straightforward path had been lost." It's very fitting because in a conflict of this scale, encompassing several countries, each made up of nobles, peasants, rich, poor, powerful, weak, evil, and innocent people, how does one choose the right path? This isn't the road less traveled, or the road not taken, or fire and ice. It isn't black and white. There is no road. Every decision made comes with sacrifice. Just something to think about as the game continues. Chapter 2 begins with Yumel and Ankaseth meeting at a peculiar landmark. Yumel is looking to Ankaseth for counsel. He seems to think his father intends for him to prepare to fight the Lotus Empire, but he isn't sure what he should do. Before he can answer, they are interrupted by none other than Baldwin, who arrives along with a mysterious young woman carrying a sword in her hands. Baldwin explains that it is a holy sword of the royal family and that it's a gift. He also says that the young woman is a gift for him as well, brought to take care of his personal needs. She's a concubine, essentially. Yumel, ever the gentleman, asks the lady her name. She answers, Mary Callan, and Yumel seems to recognize her. Suddenly, a tremor of the earth makes Mary fall into Yumel's arms, which Baldwin takes as a sign that the gods approve of the Western Division's new general. Or perhaps something more sinister is taking place. Cut to a meeting with Frederick, Magnus, Hugo, a newcomer named Zevik, and the 2 Zenobians Destin and Saradin, and this nameless Valkyrie here. Frederick remarks that the Eastern Orthodox Church has yet to make any moves, and Hugo explains that the Central Division may be keeping them from contacting anyone. So no one knows what they're up to right now, but allies in a conflict like this are paramount to success, and everyone is going to be lobbying for their support. The Western Division, led by Ankaseth, is mobilizing its forces to soon attack the Revolutionary Army. Zevik proposes liberating some slaves in the Western region before the big battle and having them fight on our side. But Saradin thinks this could be a bad idea because those slaves are Bolmakans who were actually conquered by Lotus, and that would probably piss them off. Magnus balks at the thought of freeing the Bolmakans just so they can use them as fighters, and Zevik tells him they should be doing anything to win the war, and that they would be fighting together, not using them. He says sitting around and talking about ideals isn't going to get them anywhere. There are too many enemies on too many fronts for inaction. To be fair, I think Zevik is thinking about an eventual war with Lotus as well, and he knows to take them on, the revolutionary army is gonna need a lot more revolutionaries. Frederick ends the meeting by telling Magnus to go stop the advancement of the Western Division. On the way to meet the Western Division, Magnus's battalion is intercepted by a small division of the Revolutionary Army that has grown unsatisfied with Frederick's leadership and the direction of the war in general. It goes to show the difficulties of controlling the army as it grows and gains allies with slightly differing opinions on how the revolution should play out. But Magnus takes out the leader, and the Sex Havers continue on the warpath. Then a cutscene plays at Castle Talpia in the western region, showing Raid meeting up with Yumel and Ankaseth, and he has a couple of Balmakans with him. Raid congratulates Yumel on his recent appointment to general, and Yumel tells him to state his business. Raid tells them that Lotus has sent them Balmakan reinforcements to help the Western Division fight the revolution, but Ankaseth is against this, saying they would just be further indebted to Lotus. Raid, ever the realist, is like, hey man, who do you think is calling the shots here? Lotus is in complete control of Palatinus. He then mocks the fact that his son Magnus has defected to join the revolutionary army, which is news to Yumel. He calls Raid a liar, but Raid insists it is the truth. Ankaseth goes on to decline the Balmakan reinforcements, saying that it would only hurt the morale of the soldiers. Raid eventually leaves, saying his central division will now deal with the revolution on their own terms. The second battle at Mylesia is one of the hardest yet. There are a huge number of enemy troops on this map, and I had a really hard time. There are several flying units that can come over the mountains extremely quickly, and they can be very hard to hit as well, and they seemingly had a high defense. Though admittedly, my army was in very poor shape at this point in the game. It took me almost an hour just to make it halfway across the map. Not to mention that the enemy units are getting stronger now, and this is the first time you encounter the Balmakan grappler units, which is unique to the enemy. They have a double attack from the back row, which is incredibly damaging at this point in the game. But once you encounter Raid, he will belittle Magnus's decision to swap sides, saying it was a foolish move that only served to further disrupt the kingdom of Palatinus. He also puts the blame of the Balmakan slaves being used for this fight on Magnus's shoulders, but Magnus gives him the, "No, I'm not the bad guy, you're the bad guy" speech, and then combat begins. Thankfully, Raid lines up right in the middle for us, like most final bosses, and he's pretty easy to take out. But he doesn't die. He gives up near defeat and runs away after blaming the escalation of the war on Magnus's decisions again. I really like that the game keeps throwing these moments of introspection in. Are we the baddies? Are we just making this worse? Is all this death actually worth the chance that whatever new regime we install will be able to do better and be free from corruption? And if they are free from corruption, for how long? I have no idea, but it's something to think about. The next battle has some trickery involved. First, there's a lot of units coming straight for your stronghold that you have to hold off. And if you send units over to the right, the enemy will retreat and blow up the bridge, keeping land units from crossing and delaying your assault. I was actually really excited when this happened. It was a cool departure from just take stronghold, rest, advance, take stronghold, rest, advance. Very cool. Once you make it to the last stronghold, you fight none other than Ankaseth himself. It is revealed that Sir Raid ordered the use of Balmakans in this fight, undermining the authority of both Prince Yumel and Ankaseth. This whole war is pure chaos, man. Magnus accuses Ankaseth of becoming a minion of Lotus, to which Ankaseth replies it doesn't matter either way, because they're gonna fight all the same. He says he will test the revolutionary army himself. This footage is kind of embarrassing to review. My archer needs to be in the back, and my fighter needs to be in the front row. Otherwise, this group is fine, but it doesn't matter because Ankaseth sends himself up completely exposed in the middle, and he goes down after 2 battles. But much like Raid in the last mission, Ankaseth lives to fight another day. He tells Magnus that he has become strong, but that he isn't strong enough to change the kingdom. He explains that rebelling against Palatinus means making enemies with the Lotus Empire as well. After their short conversation, Ankaseth leaves without consequence, which I thought let Magnus off a little easy as a character. I was sure that I was going to have to make a decision on whether or not to kill his father or let him live. Strategically, that would have been an enormous blow to the Western Division. At this point, the game opens up a lot. You have a choice between 3 missions, and they each have great consequences and change the direction of the story quite a bit. The first choice is to follow the orders that were given to Magnus and liberate the Balmakans at Odvera Heights. According to the Chaos Frame guide I found, this choice will drop your Chaos Frame by 15 immediately, but won't lock you out of any recruitable characters. The second choice is to head straight to Mount Ithaca, where you will still be able to recruit Sevoran, the Zenobian warlock, but none of the other characters. This also skips a few missions and has no effect on the Chaos Frame. This path will not involve the Bulmakins whatsoever. However, the third option will raise the Chaos Frame by 15 points, and will allow you to complete all the missions and recruit all the characters, within these missions anyway. That would be Lydell at the Sable Lowlands, Aisha at Audvera Heights, and then Vad and Serodan at Mount Ithaca. This is important because if you want to be able to recruit Destin and Gilbert in the final act, you have to have recruited Aisha, Serodan, Debonair, and also have a high Chaos Frame. So what mission gets picked here can drastically change what happens later in the game, which I think is pretty awesome, or incredibly frustrating if you have no idea what the fuck is going on. After a talk with Hugo, a cutscene is shown with Yumel and Mary at Castle Talpeia. He seems to have accepted the reality that Magnus has indeed joined the revolution and storms out of the room. Once he leaves, a mysterious old woman teleports into the room with Mary. She asks if Mary wants to help Prince Yumel, but she doesn't quite trust her yet. "Be gone," Mary says, "or I'll call the guards." But the old crone manages to convince Mary that she's the only one who can help the prince and ease his suffering. She says, "The blood that courses through your veins, my lord's blood, will lend you strength." Who is this mysterious lord? What man could she be referring to? Don't worry, it gets revealed later. The old crone says she will awaken the sleeping power within her, then chants some pretty evil-looking words, and Mary is enveloped in that same purple aura that emanated from Goddesloss earlier. In both playthroughs, I chose to go to the Sable Lowlands first. This can be a very important map for your army depending on how many Black Knights you want. The Black Knights look super badass, but they need an item called a Valiant Mantle, and you can only get 3 in-game without cheating, and all of them are on this map. You can pick up one from the road just before the first enemy base directly to the west, and the other 2 are drops from completely wiping out 2 specific enemy groups. Black Knights are great because their strength scales really high in the late game. They only get 2 attacks in the front row, 1 less than the Paladin, but if paired with a Princess, you can up that to 3. It's possible to recruit more Black Knights later in the game with the Love and Peace item, but it's best to go ahead and get the guaranteed drops here while you can if you want to use them. And you should want to use them. I mean, just look at them. They're awesome. This is also a good place in the game to sort of check your Chaos Frame. Lydell, the final boss here, will join your army if it's high enough, but it has to be pretty high. So if she won't join and you're going for that high Chaos Frame ending, now is the time to start paying attention and make sure you're liberating strongholds and not capturing them. When you first speak to Lydell, she says she's the last surviving member of the Order of the Red Branch, a Central Division battalion, and that the others were killed in the south by ogres. She thinks that the Revolution were the ones summoning those monsters, and doesn't know that it was, in fact, General Goddesloss. She hilariously says she'll only believe you if you beat her in a fight. To her credit, she actually has another unit in front of her for the battle, so it takes me several tries. It was pretty difficult for me because her group kept healing itself in between battles. That's not fair, only I'm allowed to do that. But once she goes down, she stays true to her word and believes you about the ogres. But in my playthrough, she didn't offer to join my army because my Chaos Frame was too low. But her words serve as a warning to tell you how you're doing in that aspect of the game. She says, "Let me give you some advice. The Revolutionary Army's recent deeds aren't garnering them any support. Just winning battles isn't good enough. People are paying attention to what you do. Be aware of that." With the Bulmakins in this region freed, it's time for the next mission at Audvera Heights. In this particular mission order, a detachment successfully liberated the mining facility there, and now the goal is to retake Castle Zigaveld, which the Revolution had just taken over a few missions ago. If you chose to come here before the Sable Lowlands, you start at Castle Zigaveld, and the mission is to retake the mines. So, pretty cool swapping of mission objectives, depending on what order you pick. Very nice. You can recruit Aisha the Zenobian here if your Chaos Frame is high enough, but it doesn't have to be as high as when you try to recruit Lydell. But in my first playthrough, I didn't know about her, so I didn't recruit her at all. This is the first mission where I ran into one of those pumpkin head units. They have a really awesome attack where they take off their head and then kick it at you, and when it hits, it deals half of that unit's total HP and damage. The last boss of this map is a Doll Master with 2 golems, so they have increased damage, but he's very exposed in the front row and goes down pretty quick to my Black Knight group. Afterward, one of the Bulmakins thanks Magnus for helping his people, and Magnus admits that the official reason for the liberation was to gain their support for the current war, as well as the eventual fight with the Lotus Empire. But Magnus tells him that's not the reason why he came. He knew that the Bulmakins were being treated unfairly, had their country taken away from them, and then used as slaves or foot soldiers in the war. He talks about how the Revolution will abolish the class system once the Palatinus king is overthrown and the influence of Lotus is driven out. He declines the help of the Neardomese troops, and the young Balmalkin says that Magnus has no idea what the Lotus Empire is capable of, and that he hopes the same fate that befell his own country of Nerdam does not happen to Palatinus. Remember that they invaded Nerdam and took it over before setting their sights on Palatinus. Before the battle at Mount Ithaca, Magnus talks to Hugo about his wish to avoid battle with the Western Division. And wouldn't you know it, just a few moments later a messenger arrives with news from Prince Eumel. He has sent a peace treaty that would stop the fighting between the Revolutionary Army and the Western Division. It also concedes the use of Neardomese troops in any further battles, but Magnus notes that it doesn't say anything about freeing the Neardomese, just that they won't be used as soldiers. He knows that even though they want the battles to stop, they still won't defy Lotus by letting the Neardomese go. But it turns out that the Central Division, led by Sir Raid, has no desire for peace. A messenger barges in, warning of enemy troops approaching, and that many Balmalkins are among them. The Central Division has arrived. Before the decision about the peace treaty can be brought to Fedric and discussed, this battle has to be resolved. In this battle you can recruit both Vad, a Balmalkin grappler, and Saradin, though in my first playthrough I didn't get either of them. To get Vad, you need to have liberated the mining camp at Aldvera Heights first. Then in this battle, you have to go liberate the town of Ketakan up north, and after they destroy the bridge, you can go ahead and clear the mission, and Vad will join you afterward. Just don't kill him, basically, and you should get him. As you can see in this playthrough, I just mercilessly cut him down in the field. He was in my way, and he was worth the experience. This save ended up being extremely chaotic, but it ended up being useful for the low chaos frame ending after I learned some things and patched up my army later on. Once you reach Sir Raid at the final stronghold, he's complaining to some knights about having no reinforcements from the Western Division. I guess he didn't know about the peace offering that Eumel sent, because those guys aren't coming. He asks about the whereabouts of Sir Baldwin, the guy from Lotus who gave Godeslas the Netherworld fruit, and apparently he withdrew his troops as well. Raid is actually kind of tough because he has 2 paladins with him, and when they go in the back row, they act as healers instead, and they can both heal twice. So even though he's exposed in the middle, like most of the other end bosses, you have to do a lot of damage to him very quickly to get him down. I actually had to swap all my units around just to get enough damage to be able to kill him. I was so happy when he went down. This mission took me almost 2 hours to complete because of how bad my army was. But you'll see the difference that taking care of your units makes in my other playthrough. But for this one, I used Magnus, a Black Knight, a Paladin, an Archer, and Contreta, who is a Cleric, and he went down in 2 rounds. So what's interesting about this scene is that if Dio left your army earlier, Raid will live here and run away after calling you a bunch of lowly imbeciles. If Dio is still in your army, Raid will simply die. Afterward, a meeting takes place between Magnus, Hugo, Destin, and Saradin. Destin says that they've been ordered to go west and prepare for an invasion from Lotus, even though an attack from them is not imminent. Saradin relays orders from headquarters that the Revolutionary Army will accept nothing but complete and total surrender from the Western Division. Destin says that he was ordered to use the newly liberated Balmalkin troops to fight against Lotus, and he refused. So him and Saradin are leaving the Revolutionary Army. Destin says he's going to fight Lotus on his own terms because the revolution slowly became more about abolishing the class system than liberation from the control of Lotus, which has always been the Zenobians' primary concern. Also, if you chose the option I can't do it when ordered to kill Frederick earlier in the game, Saradin will actually offer to stay and join your army. His class is officially called Warlock, but he practically functions the same as an Archmage, an extremely powerful backline spellcaster. Once again, the mission table opens up and you have multiple paths you can take. You can either choose to go to the Azure Plains, where a character named Sheen can be recruited, or Mount Kyriolith. The completion of Mount Kyriolith opens up the Wintonus mission, and if you start that one, then the Azure Plains mission where you recruit Sheen can no longer be completed. But I would advise getting Sheen because you can take him to a town later to get an item called the Decoy Cap, which increases the rate at which random encounters happen while exploring maps. It helps recruit extra creatures for your army like dragons, golems, fairies, and things like that. In this playthrough, I went to Mount Kyriolith first. When you zone in, if Dio left your army earlier, a cutscene will play showing Sir Raid pacing around and cursing to himself about his enemies. He then starts yelling at someone off screen who turns out to be Dio. He tells Raid to shut the hell up, walks up to him, draws his sword, and cuts the man down. "No worries, I'm here to take your place," Dio says. And he walks away, leaving Raid to die. Not really the ending I was expecting for him. At Mount Kyriolith, the first goblin group I ran into beat my ass, so I reloaded a save and went to the Azure Plains instead. As far as the Azure Plains mission goes, I couldn't figure out the reason we were there other than Hugo saying it was to secure a road that led to Castle Talpia in Wintonus where Prince Eumel is at. This is actually a skippable mission, but I wanted to recruit Sheen, so here we are. If you go to Coppermine, you can find him floating around there. He reveals that he's from the Lotus Empire, and he's disappointed that there's a lot of fighting going on here as well. After hearing that he's from Lotus, Magnus pulls out his sword and is ready to kill him. But Sheen tells him to relax, that he's simply a peace-loving hawk man. He asks if Magnus knows of a place where there's no war and lots of cute girls. He wants to know if Palatinus will be a country like that if they win the war, and Magnus says, well, I mean, we'll have peace, that's for sure. And with that, Sheen agrees to join the army. The boss battle here is pretty tough. The leader is a member of the Brigade of Radiant Cross, the formidable group of Lotus Knights that have conquered most of the continent. We'll see more of them later, and they all look similar to this guy. The leader sits up in the middle, but he's got 2 paladins in the front row with 3 attacks each, as well as 2 sorceresses in the back. That's a lot of damage, but I managed to get him down even though one of my units died. He tells them to enjoy their victory because soon the main force will arrive and put an end to the revolution. The scene following this is one of the reasons the game feels like watching a theatrical performance to me. Magnus just randomly runs into his father in the woods. 2 high-ranking officials in opposing armies, in contested territory, just out and about with no guards or anything. Sure. My theatrical suspension of disbelief is at an all-time high right now. Ankaseth says that he's heard the Revolutionary Army no longer wants to settle things peacefully. He asks if it's possible for Magnus to withdraw his troops. Magnus says that will change nothing, and Ankaseth tells him not to be misled by a narrow definition of revolution. Ankaseth's idea of revolution is in small but meaningful changes that take place over long periods of time. That all of this fighting for immediate change is just causing useless bloodshed. But Magnus thinks to help the people you must get in the thick of it with them. He says, "Father, you hold your ideals, but do absolutely nothing to achieve them." Ankaseth disagrees. He thinks that a man who outranks others can become a benevolent leader that the people can love, trust, and put their faith into if he exercises his power in a just manner. He says that Prince Yumel is looking to reform the country and that he'll be there to assist him along the way. Then he asks a very good question. Can the Revolutionary Army lead the kingdom once the war is over? Is Frederick capable of being that leader? Then he gets really close to a title drop. Are you of the caliber to lead this kingdom? Magnus says he doesn't know. And he replies with, "Are you telling me that Yumel can do it? Is he the one of such caliber?" Ankaseth says he doesn't know, but that he wants to trust in him. At this point in the story, Yumel is known to be soft-hearted and kind. He sympathizes with the plight of the lower class and wants to make peace without resorting to violence. Remember that Ankaseth has been Yumel's personal bodyguard and has seen him grow over the years. He knows this kid, and he believes he can become the benevolent leader that Palatinus needs. 3 men who want to change the kingdom for the better, but all with much different ideas of how to make that change happen. The perfect recipe for good drama and conflict. Ankaseth turns to leave, but Magnus stops him, asking why he accepted being branded as a murderer. Why didn't he tell them the truth? If you don't remember, he's talking about when one of the nobles tried to assassinate Prince Yumel several years ago. Shouldn't he have been hailed as a hero for saving the prince? Well, Ankaseth answers, "Why, you ask? Do you know whose orders the assassin was following? The person who plotted Yumel's death was our king, King Procus himself." He goes on to say that the king was not well at the time. His wife had just died, which he blamed on Yumel. He said the king was also suspicious of Yumel's peculiar features and that he took counsel from a foreign sorcerer. So what's the deal with Yumel's features? We know he has silver hair and gray eyes. Did the king question whether or not he was Yumel's real father? And who was this mysterious sorcerer? I swear, after every few missions, the story just pulled me in deeper. Constant escalation. At this point, I'm intrigued, I'm invested, I am locked in. The next mission is at Mount Kirialith, the last stop on the road to Prince Yumel at Castle Talpia in Wentinus. This is a really tough battle for the unprepared. There are a ton of enemy groups, and a lot of them have powerful goblins and ogres in them. You'll notice the humans in this region acting strangely. That's the power of the infernal aura affecting them. This is also the first cockatrice group you run into, and these guys are just the worst. They look like giant chickens, and they can cast a spell that petrifies multiple units at once. And the shitty thing is that petrification persists from battle to battle. And you either need an item that cures petrification, or you have to go to a witch's den to have the effect reversed. If I see them on the map, I usually just try to avoid them altogether. Or you can make an anti-cockatrice unit, a specialized group of cockblockers, you could say, like my friend group from college, and these units usually consist of golems and some character equipped with a hallowed shield, which prevents changes to your status from happening. You can thank young boy Troy for that shield. This is actually the mission that caused me to start another playthrough and do it right this time. So many trips to the Witch's Den, and I was running into a problem where I kept having to swap all my most powerful units into one group just to have a chance to take out the strong enemy groups. I didn't have enough high-level troops to spread them out as much as I wanted, and the enemies were just getting tougher. But I did eventually manage to clear this mission. At the beginning of the Wintonus mission, Magnus must make a decision between making peace with the Western Division or following orders and fighting them instead. This choice has some interesting ramifications on how the rest of the story plays out. If you choose to make peace, then Baldwin will be the mission's final boss encounter. Ankaseth is an ally for the battle, and he can be recruited if and only if you chose the I can't do it option when ordered to kill Frederick earlier in the game. Also, your chaos frame will raise by 20. If you decline to make peace, then Ankaseth will be the final boss and you can't recruit him. I chose here to make peace with them, and so a meeting with Hugo, Magnus, and Ankaseth takes place. But during the meeting, Leia bursts into the room and tells them all that Prince Yumel has been arrested for treason by a Knight of Lotus. She says they also want the one who instigated it, meaning Ankaseth. He offers to sacrifice himself to appease them, but Magnus shuts that down. Magnus then proposes that they simply go and save the prince, and Hugo starts laying out the battle plans. This is actually kind of a unique mission because Ankaseth's group will make its way to the castle on its own. And it's a formidable group of 2 cataphracts, which are tanks, and 2 Dianas, which are the highest form of the archer unit, and they get 3 attacks from the back. All of these units become yours if you manage to recruit Ankaseth. So, that's a pretty large incentive. The final boss here is Baldwin, like I said earlier, and I actually started this fight purely by accident. One of my groups was chasing an enemy group and sort of clipped Baldwin sideways, so they started the fight all out of order, but they still ended up winning because, again, he's just a sitting duck right there in the middle of the group. But he doesn't actually die. He just says, "Damn you," and teleports out of there. That actually caught me off guard. I didn't know he could just teleport around. Afterward, Baldwin is shown trying to take Prince Yumel out of the castle by force, but Mary won't let him. She tells Yumel to stand back, and then she zaps Baldwin with some Bane magic. She tells Yumel to run, but he refuses to leave without her. This boy is absolutely spellbound. Foreshadowing. Anyway, Mary tries to zap Baldwin again, but he ducks the spell and backhands her to the ground. Then he punches Yumel in the gut, throws him over his shoulder, and the scene fades to black. Later, Magnus arrives only to find an empty room. He was too late. But with peace made with Ankaseth and Baldwin defeated for now, the western region was now under the control of the Revolutionary Army. But anticipating invasion from Lotus, Frederick had the castle evacuated, and the armies withdrew back to Mount Ithaca. The army continued to grow as more sympathizers to the cause defected from the Western and Central divisions to join up. At the close of Chapter 2, the state of the world is quite different than when the game first began. Rebels have become allies. Supernatural forces have come into play. Powerful foes, long hidden in the shadows, have begun to make their moves. And with Prince Yumel kidnapped, we turn our attention eastward to the lands of the old Orthodox Church, where the classical religion of Palatinus, birthism, is still practiced openly. Chapter 3. Time passes as their backs break under their burdens. The start of Chapter 3 opens with a cutscene at Winnea, the capital of Palatinus. King Procus and his firstborn son Amrius are looking for an ancient source of power called the Ultimate Power that is supposedly located at a hidden place called the Temple of Bertha. Amrius says with this ultimate power they can relive the legend of the Progenitor and finally have the strength to fight back Lotus as well. And they have inserted a secret agent of sorts named Karakov to destabilize the eastern region. But their scheming is interrupted by Baldwin, some other Lotus Knights, and a stately-looking man named Richard the Dragonheart. He's the older brother of Baldwin and the leader of the Caliganus Order, which is a powerful group of knights from Lotus. Richard says he's here to issue a decree that, effective immediately, the kingdom of Palatinus has been stripped of its autonomy by order of the Pope himself. Amrius takes offense to this, saying that wasn't the bargain they made when Lotus initially tried to invade. But Richard says they have committed a grievous crime by involving the use of ogres in battle, even though Baldwin is the one who initiated that whole situation. He goes on to criticize the state of the war, saying Palatinus should be destroyed for this incompetence, but the Pope has other plans. The king agrees with Richard, who tells him to surrender the castle, and then Amrius foolishly tries to kill Richard. The weak attempt is easily thwarted, and Richard, being the badass that he is, simply tells King Procus to discipline his children better. He then calls out Baldwin's string of failures with the Revolutionary Army, saying useless people don't deserve to exist, even his own brother. Sheesh, man. The next scene shows another meeting between Magnus, Frederick, Ankaseth, and Zevik, who are deciding what to do about the Central Division. Zevik wants to petition the Eastern Orthodox Church for help. Frederick wants to make peace with the Central Division to avoid more suffering for the people. Zevik is worried that the Church will ally with the Central Division instead, and that they can't trust the Western Division soldiers who just defected. He notes that Magnus disobeyed direct orders by making peace with them anyway. Ankaseth tries to reassure him. We vowed to fight alongside the Sex Havers, and that's what we're gonna do. Then a messenger arrives saying Central Division troops are approaching, and Zevik gets mad and storms out of the room. Frederick then asks if Ankaseth will join the Revolutionary Army, and he declines because in this playthrough, even though I chose peace with the Western region, I still chose not to speak up for Frederick when Magnus asked to execute him. So no Ankaseth for me in this save file. He says his priority is to go and save Yumel instead. Before the start of the next mission, if you go to the battalion management screen, you'll notice that Magnus's group has been set apart from the rest of the groups. That's because he's the leader of a legion, which is a brand new mechanic for Chapter 3. See the empty white boxes? You can put other groups there and they'll follow Magnus around. Special units called Centurions can lead legions, as well as certain recruitable characters. There are several different formations you can choose from, like middle wall and funnel shift, etc. But I'm not going to spend much time on this honestly because legions are terrible. There's really no actual use for them because you can just direct the groups yourself and you have much more control that way. And the worst part is that the core of the legion, like the main group that's leading it, has to have 4 soldiers in it, the weakest unit in the game. The idea being that the soldiers are supposed to run messages around to other groups. Even with the added RP element, it just sucks too much to use. And I promised a fan of the game that I wouldn't try to be too positive about the legions when I made this video, just to be nice, so promise delivered, buddy. Also, being the leader of a legion puts a number over that unit's head on the battlefield, so Magnus is going to have this goofy looking number 1 over the top of his head for quite a while, because it took a long time for me to figure out how to turn it off. Also, most of the footage you see from this point on is from my second playthrough, and I have a much improved army this time around. Paladins everywhere. Lots of Dianas, lots of clerics, and I kept Dio and recruited the Zenobians Aisha and Saradin. There's actually an enemy legion here at the Dardanelles mission, as well as one to the north. They're really only annoying because the edges of the formation can catch your groups at a weird angle if you don't approach them the right way. And what usually happens is one of your groups ends up taking them all on one after the other unless you plan a coordinated attack properly. This mission was the first time I actually felt bad fighting against the final boss. It seems like these people are now afraid of what the Revolutionary Army has become. Eugene the cleric here makes it sound like they had quite peaceful lives before all of this turmoil, and yet they still choose to fight. It probably doesn't help that the infernal aura and the appearance of the ogres are terrifying the populace. Once defeated, Eugene says this is the end of the revolution, for the Lotus Empire has finally sent their troops here to stop all of this rebelling nonsense. And she dies. Rip Eugene. Afterward, a scene with Magnus, Troy, Leia, and Dio plays where they're coming to the realization that war with the Lotus Empire is finally happening. This has to be pretty daunting considering what the Lotus military had been able to accomplish in the events prior to the start of the game. Hugo arrives and suggests that either 1. The Revolutionary Army is the target of Lotus, or 2. That the Eastern Orthodox Church is their target. Either way, Lotus does not want us and the Church to join forces. Next up, another scene plays over in the East Orthodox Church region showing Archbishop Odoron, a man whose model looks way too much like Goddeslas's for some reason. Remember the secret agent sent by the royal family I was talking about earlier? This is that guy. His name is Sir Karakov. There's also a red-haired woman in front of a group of soldiers. The red-haired lady is Europa and she can actually be recruited later. But suddenly one of the Valkyries falls to her knees and starts exuding that evil purple aura that we've grown accustomed to. Karakov starts freaking out, saying the devil has got a hold of this woman. He has the greatest portrait of all the characters, by the way. The Valkyrie begins to approach them, and Europa regretfully kills her before she can get too close. Karakov takes this possession as proof that Archbishop Odoron had a pact with demons and is in fact a servant of the Netherworld, which we know is a bunch of nonsense. Clearly this man is a rat who is working for a higher power trying to frame the church. But I'll play along for now and let the story play out. Brigade of Radiant Cross. This battle takes place on the way to meet with the Eastern Orthodox Church. Before the fight, Hugo informs Magnus that Lotus made an official statement in Winea, the capital, and said they were only temporarily annexing Palatinus to deal with the Revolutionary Army and that independence would be re-established once proper control of the region was secured. They also said there would be no peace accord. Lotus is intent on not letting the revolution reach the church, so we'll see a ton of their soldiers on this mission. In fact, the first group you run into explains this quite well. By the order of Pope Saldian, you will be executed by us, the Brigade of Radiant Cross. So these dudes are on a holy mission. but the leader goes down in 3 hits to my new and improved squad here. 2 paladins, a priest, Magnus with an ice blade, and a wizard that I never got to turn into an archmage because I couldn't get his alignment low enough. He still hits like a truck though. The final boss here is a knight named Proofless, and he's not just some random red shirt. He's actually closely tied to Richard and Baldwin as a fellow member of the Caligulus Order, which is a highly ranked and prestigious group of knights who are controlling the Brigade of Radiant Cross. And yet with all that experience, Proofless sets up right in the middle here. How many sword slashes does it take to get to the center of a Templar?
Let's find out. 1, 2, 3, 3.
Sweet victory. I know this may not look fun, but I was loving every second of it. My first army was getting absolutely thrashed in the later missions, and it was taking me like 2 hours to complete a mission. So this is massively improved gameplay for me. But Proofless has the "I'm too cool to die right now" plot armor. He says our strength was impressive and then teleports out of the room. I guess that's only something Caligulus Order Knights can do. Hopefully someone with deeper knowledge can confirm that in the comments because I honestly don't know. After the battle, we're shown a cutscene at Winea, the capital, with Yumel and Mary. Yumel is once again lamenting his weak position in this war, his inability to make any notable change. He wants power. He asks himself, how can I walk proudly among them? Which is quite sad. With Ankeseth's great military reputation and Magnus's newfound glory with the Revolutionary Army, it leaves Yumel feeling insignificant in comparison. They were the 2 people he was closest to growing up, and now the war threatens to drive them apart forever. With power, real power, he could stop the war, he could stop Lotus, and bring them all together again. And it is during this moment of vulnerability that Baldwin sweeps in. Cue the bad guy music. Baldwin says that Yumel is entitled to a certain power that can only be wielded by the royal family. He speaks of the Progenitor, Yumel's ancestor, recalling how he gained the ultimate power. He says that if he had that power, everyone, including Lotus, would kneel before him. Our prince has much to think about. As Baldwin is leaving, he questions Mary about who she really is. How could she have cast that spell? How did she gain such power? Mary doesn't have much to say, and Baldwin deduces that she was sent by Zeta. Zeta is the old crone from before, just to clear that up. It gets revealed later, but there's no reason to leave that up in the air for now. He tells Mary that if she crosses him again, he'll kill her. All for the greater good, I'm sure. After he leaves, Yumel declares that he does indeed want the ultimate power of the Progenitor. Baldwin made it sound like a pretty good deal. Then Mary gathers him in a touching embrace and declares that she will help him fulfill his wish. Before the next mission, after the usual briefing from Hugo, Leia will ask if she was invited to the meeting to get a special assignment. She doesn't, which kind of bummed me out a little, because honestly, aside from a few lines here and there, Leia isn't really developed that much. It turns out that her old friend Meridia is here. This is actually a pretty funny interaction, because when Meridia first speaks off screen, you can see Leia cringe a little bit. It turns out that Leia's father sent Meridia south to give a message to the Revolutionary Army and to check on her while she was there. Remember that Leia's father is a nobleman from up north, named Count Silvus. As it turns out, he supports the revolution, but must do so quietly for now. Afterward, Meridia offers to join the battalion, and you really should have her along because she's a very powerful siren, and she'll only offer to join here if Leia is still alive and in your army. In this playthrough, Meridia joined at level 3, which is absurdly low for chapter 3, but in another playthrough she was like level 20 or something. I have no idea what determines what level she is, or if that was just a bug, just thought it was worth noting here. Remember Gilles, Yumel's bodyguard from the beginning of the game? He's the final boss here. He tells you with finality that you will not be getting the support of the Eastern Orthodox Church under any circumstances. Then he goes down 3 attacks later and drops the bomb that the church is already under their control. And then he dies. Afterward, Hugo tells you that Odoron has lost his position as Archbishop due to allegedly being in contact with denizens of the Netherworld, and he confirms what Gilles said about the church being controlled by the Central Division. Karakov, the guy with the really funny character photo, has replaced him and is now effectively the general of the Eastern Division. So it's time to hurry up and get this situation under control. Once again, we have a choice between 3 different paths to take. And this is an interesting fork in the story because no matter what you choose, one of the missions will become unplayable. And since they all have recruitable characters, you're going to miss out on some of them no matter what. So here, you can choose either the Vert Plateau, the Tremos Mountains, or Capitrium. If you choose the mountains, it will drop your chaos frame by 10, but this is the only path that lets you recruit Paul. Now, I didn't recruit Paul on any of my playthroughs, but his character profile says he's an enchanter, which is the upgraded Dollmaster. Apparently when you find him, he's in a state of despair after accidentally turning his friend to stone. If you go to Capitrium first, you lose the Vert Plateau mission and a shot at recruiting Europa, so I chose to go to the Vert Plateau. To get Europa, the Berthan Sentinel from the cutscene with Odoron earlier, you have to take Magnus's group to Hilverich, and after a brief conversation, she'll set out for the enemy castle with her own unit. If she survives and you win the mission, she'll offer to join you. She's a Centurion, which means she can lead a legion if you give a shit about that, and you shouldn't, by the way. This map also has a lot of venerable dragons here, and they will fuck you up if you're not careful. Venerable dragons are the highest rank of dragon type units. Their attacks look pretty cool too, like this Tiamat here who uses the spell Evil Dead on the whole group. It deals damage and can put literally the whole party to sleep. Or this Quetzalcoatl, which casts Radiant Gale. It does damage and can paralyze the whole group. Quite powerful. The last boss of the mission here is a former comrade of Europa's, so you get a special cutscene if you bring her here. It seems that Europa was cast out under suspicion of consorting with the Netherworld as well. Despite Europa's pleas that she's innocent, the Dragon Tamer is hearing none of it. But I'll give her this much. At least she doesn't stand in the middle row and let Europa's group kill her in a few hits. This group is pretty solid too, with 2 paladins and 2 Freyas, and Europa has a really cool spinny attack animation as well. After the battle, the Dragon Tamer Fournier tells us that we stand no chance against the ultimate power, and then she dies. Europa then joins the army and it's off to Capitrium. There's another recruitable character here if you meet the requirements to do so. His name is Bisk, and the cool thing about him is that he's a werewolf, and he mechanically works sort of like a werewolf too, meaning that during the day he'll fight as a man, and at night he'll turn into a werewolf, and he's much stronger in his wolf form. To get him, you have to have remained silent when asked to kill Frederick, and also not have recruited Aisha, Saradin, or Ankaseth up to this point. For this reason, he's a really popular character in low chaos frame runs, and he also happens to be the final boss of this mission. I fought him twice to show off his 2 forms. His dialogue also changes a little bit depending on what form he's in. He was imprisoned here by Ankaseth in an older conflict, and his jailers released him in the hopes that he would stop your army. But he's no match for Magnus and my paladins. When defeated, he drops the Evil Blade, which is a powerful sword that has a chance to put your enemies to sleep. Afterward, a cutscene plays showing Yumel being held captive by some Lotus Knights. As he struggles against them, one of the knights pulls out another world fruit and forces Yumel to eat it. Almost immediately, he's enveloped in the infernal aura, but then something strange happens. The aura turns blue, and Yumel stands tall. This is not what happened to Godislas. This is something different. A light flashes as 2 of the knights are killed instantly. It flashes once more, and another knight topples over, his helmet clattering across the stone floor. The 4th knight tries to escape, but to no avail. The light flashes once more and he drops to the ground. The blue aura fades and Yumel drops to his knees. Then Mary appears. Yumel tells her to stand back, afraid he's going to kill her too, but she gathers him in an embrace, calming the prince. He says he feels hatred, rage, and power flowing through him. Then he asks, "Who are you?" as if speaking to someone inside of himself. And answering a question only he can hear, Yumel says, "Power? Yes, grant me power." The scene fades with Mary telling him that all is now within his grasp. She says she'll be by his side forever. Then we're treated to another cutscene at the Eastern Orthodox Church in Celessus. Karakov and Prince Amrius are in the midst of an argument. Amrius is demanding to know the location of the Temple of Bertha so that he may have the ultimate power. Karakov says he knows where it is, but that he's not going to tell. Then our old pal Proofless appears to straighten this matter out. You see, the royal family was trying to get the ultimate power for themselves under the noses of Lotus, but Karakov here pulled a Peter Pettigrew and sold them out. Satisfied with how things have turned out, Proofless turns to leave, telling Karakov to deal with the approaching revolutionary army. It seems Karakov was expecting some kind of reward for his treachery, but Proofless clearly had no intention of gratifying this man. It falls in line with how Baldwin treated Godislas, willing to make deals, but never thinking for a minute that they were equals. The next scene shows us a meeting between Magnus, Hugo, and Europa if he recruited her. Hugo says he's heard the Central Division is off looking for something called the Ultimate Power, and when Magnus questions what that is, Europa fills them in. The tremendous power that the Progenitor attained when he was blessed by Bertha, but that's all she knows about it. She says only Archbishop Odoron would know if it was real. Then a messenger arrives telling them that the Brigade of Radiant Cross has left Celessus and headed to the south. Europa is panicked by this. She says from rumors she's heard that the Temple of Bert is located somewhere south in the Tremos Mountains. Certain that Lotus has new information, Magnus is determined to liberate Celessus and save Archbishop Odoron. Once you reach the final base, a scene plays with Karakov begging for his life to a very reasonably agitated Prince Amrius. God, this guy really is a rat. Amrius tells him to save it for the revolutionary army and then walks out. Then a few knights show up to warn him that we're at his doorstep. So he sets up in the dead center of the group, just like I like it. Takes one hit and one crit from my paladins, and that's GG. Karakov lives though. And Magnus and Europa figure out that Karakov was the one behind framing Archbishop Odoron in the Birthen Sentinels. Karakov spills his guts after Magnus yells at him once. He says he only did as Prince Amrius ordered him to, and pleads for Magnus to spare his life. Trying desperately to bargain, he tells them that Lotus knows the location of the Temple of Bertha, and that they are heading there right now for the ultimate power. But Odoron suddenly appears, and he is shocked at what he has heard. You told them the location of the temple? My god. He tells Magnus and Europa that they must head south immediately. Magnus asks if the ultimate power is real, but Odoron wants to know who he is. I am Magnus, member of the Revolutionary Army and leader of the Sex Havers. After Europa convinces Odoron that he's trustworthy, he confirms the existence of the ultimate power. He says not only did the Progenitor have this power, but the Knights of Danica had it as well. This is the first time the character Danica is mentioned, but she and her knights will be very important as the story continues. The power was so immense that it was deemed a legend and hidden away. He explains that only the child of the Covenant, the one who made a pact with God before his day of birth, is entitled to the power. Bonus points if you can guess who this mysterious child of the Covenant is. So at this point, there were only 3 missions left in Chapter 3, but there were a couple of powerful units that required long quest lines that I hadn't gotten around to yet, and I decided that now was the time. The first I wanted to go for was the Dragoon, and it was actually my favorite quest line of the 3. Dragoons are special in that you can only make one of them, and they're pretty powerful, especially if you promote the right unit. A lot of this can be done as you progress through the game though, if you know what you're doing. The 3 items you need to make a Dragoon unit are the Dragon Helm, Dragon Armor, and the Sword of Tiamat. After Mission 4, you go to the town of Edorf in Mylesia, and an old man there will tell you how there used to be tons of dragons there in the mountains. He says that dragoons used to come all the time to kill the dragons, and as a result their economy flourished. But when the dragons became more scarce, so did the dragoons. And the blacksmiths who used to make their weapons and armor became farmers as the work dried up. He goes on to tell you that the remaining blacksmiths with the knowledge to make the dragoon armor are in Burgundy at Gunther Piedmont and Kynora near Mount Ithaca. You can go to Burgundy after Mission 7, but you have to enter the town at night so you can talk to the drunk guy. He mumbles some nonsense about his wife being an Indigan, so he's afraid of her. And apparently she's been nagging him about his drinking, and I can totally see why. If you come back to the same town during the day, one of the workers will tell you that he's actually a very skilled blacksmith, and that his wife did in fact leave him because of his drinking. This is the dude we need to get to make us a dragon helmet. The worker will tell you that the wife left to live with her parents in Volmus, so that's where we go next. His wife does have the blue hair that Indigans are known for. I wonder now if Magnus's mother was an Indigan. They didn't even give this poor woman a name. It just says, blacksmith's wife. His wife doesn't take much convincing. She says he may be a drunk, but by God can that man swing a hammer. She also offers us a discount on the helmet he makes. Sweet. And finally, if you go back to Burgundy during the daytime, they will sell you a dragon helm. Step 1 complete. The Dragon Armor Artisan in Kynora will tell you he needs a rare ore called Chondrite to make the armor for you. Chondrite is kind of tricky to get, and I definitely wouldn't have found it without a guide. You have to go to Melfi and Dardanelles on the 6th of the month. On no other day will this work, which is kind of tricky because days go by as you move around the map, and time also passes as you move across the battlefield once you enter a mission. So you need to get there on like the 4th, and then spend a day traveling to Melfi and then just wait for the 6th. Once you do that, you can enter the town during the day and buy the Chondrite. The salesman says it's a metal that comes from the sky, which is pretty cool. Take the Chondrite to the artisan in Kynora and he'll make the dragon armor. The next step is to go back to Edorf. The old man will tell you that the only other item you need to be a dragoon is a sword of Tiamat, but unfortunately no blacksmith in the world is skilled enough to make one these days. He says the only place a sword of Tiamat could possibly be is in the belly of a dragon named Graz Nui. He spins a mythical tale saying that Graz Nui can only be defeated by those with a pure heart who aren't seeking glory. All others with selfish desires would simply be eaten. Well, I am 100% in search of glory and power, so hopefully this works out. He says the only person that might know where Graz Nui can be found is a barkeep in the town of Elaine on the Vert Plateau. The conversation with this barkeep in Elaine is great. Allow me to paraphrase. Yeah, I've seen Graz Nui. 20 years ago when I was just a little boy, got bored at church, ran off into the woods. That's when the sky darkened, and all of a sudden I was in a place bathed in golden light, and there he was, Graz Nui. I was so scared I pissed myself and passed out cold. Then I woke up back at Mama's house. I didn't believe this dude for a second. I was just convinced the game had led me on some wild goose chase, and that the legend of the Dragoon was just some 25-year-old internet joke that finally caught up to me. But the barkeep offers you a scale that he found which he claims came from Graz Nui. And now for the final step. You have to go to the town of Pineg and Celesis. Who names these fucking towns? And here, your unit leader of whatever group you have will fight a one-on-one battle with the Divine Dragon for the Sword of Tiamat. I used Magnus. Go into town and a cutscene will play where Magnus uses the dragon scale to attract Grosnui. He will soon appear in his divine glory. Feeble humans. Alright, I'll fight you. This actually took me a few attempts. On my first try he crit me on his very last attack or I would have had him, but he will go down eventually, and once you get him, the Sword of Tiamat is yours and you can make someone a Dragoon. I thought about it for a while, but ultimately chose Kenny here. He's had quite a career, from promising fighter to burgeoning knight to capable paladin to unstoppable Dragoon. After his ascension, Kenny started hitting like a fucking truck. You'll see later how he one-shot some of the later bosses. I will admit I was disappointed with the Dragoon animations though. I made a Dragoon in Final Fantasy XIV, and I was sort of hoping he would fly into the air and come crashing down from the sky. But I'll take the damage. No complaints here. The Lich unit also requires a short quest for one of the items, but it's not very long. You need 4 items, but 3 of them are not hard to find. You get them from enemy units or pick them up when you're moving across the battlefield, and you can even find them in shops. But the Ring of the Dead requires a quest, and it actually starts here in Celessus. Take Magnus to Banabara, and a little girl will tell you she found a creepy letter in the forest, and she gives it to you. Not weird at all. This is the Dark Invitation. Then you take this to the town of Quellen on the Zenobian border. There, you will be greeted by a mysterious hag. Their words, not mine. And she will give you the Ring of the Dead after saying a bunch of creepy stuff. You can use this to complete a set of Lich gear and turn one of your chaotic units into this very powerful spellcaster. The Lich can cast advanced magic 3 times from the back row, and they look pretty cool. I did the quest for the Princess unit later, so I'll show that when it becomes relevant. With the means to make a Lich acquired, I set off for Mission 25, No Man's Land. It was time to continue the chase for the Temple of Berta. In this mission, we found ourselves surrounded by tons of soldiers from Lotus. This is a pretty cool mission because as soon as it starts, a bunch of enemy units swarm your base, so you have to be ready. If you have Aisha and Saradin in your battalion, you can recruit Debonair, the lusciously blonde-haired Zenobian from the town of Ibudeli. He tells you that Destin and Gilbert are chasing the Caliganus Order and should be arriving in the area soon. He makes the very bold proclamation that Lotus's philosophy of the strong ruling over the weak is wrong, and asks if he can join Magnus's army. After adding one more Zenobian to your collection, there's still a battle to finish. The final boss here is a siren called Utica, and she says some very cryptic things. The infernal aura is spreading across the land. The time has come. The resurrection. It is time for our queen to awaken. Our time has finally come. Do not interfere, humans. Do not stand in our way. Who is this queen? Great speech, but she's no match for my Dragoon unit hitting for over 100 damage every turn. Before she dies, Utica says, "I leave the rest to you, Zeta." If you don't remember, Zeta is the old crone that has been hanging around Mary. You know, the one who awoke her dark powers. What could she be up to? Before the start of Mission 26, we get a cutscene of Proofless questioning his knights over what the heck just happened with Prince Yumel. Mary is still on the ground here, but Yumel seems to be missing. He tries to question Mary about what she knows, but she refuses to answer, just like with Baldwin. Then the scene fades to black, and it's finally time to assault the Temple of Berta and take it back from Lotus. The final boss of this mission is once again Proofless. He's seen here kneeling in the center of a peculiar stone circle when a soldier interrupts him with news of the Revolutionary Army's arrival. "Forget the prince," Proofless says. "I can break the seal myself." He gives that a shot with the sword that was gifted to Prince Yumel earlier in the game, but nothing happens. Then my group of god killers show up to ruin the rest of his evening. "Looks like the legend remains just that," Magnus says. Proofless says they will be sacrificial lambs, and then the battle for the Temple of Berta begins. I thought for a brief moment that this fight might be a challenge, that surely a high-ranking Caliganus Order member would have some secret defense, some kind of trick up his sleeve. But then Kenny crit him for 198 damage, and my other paladin finished him off in 2 turns. With Proofless very much dead this time, it seemed that we had won. Lotus had been pushed back. The Temple of Berta was saved. Dio arrives to tell Magnus that they're sending the troops home. But as soon as they're about to leave, Yumel walks out from behind a wall and over to the stone circle. The room darkens, and it gets eerily quiet. "Don't worry, I'll be back, Magnus," Yumel thinks to himself. He draws his sword, turns it point down to the ground, and grips the blade with both hands, spilling blood onto the stones below. The ground cracks, then erupts with violent swirling blue light. We get some spectacularly foreboding music, and Yumel floats into the air. Then 4 otherworldly beings in green and gray spiky armor materialize around him. These 4 are the Knights of Danica. They turn to face him, then they all vanish from sight. What the hell is going on here? Well, the Temple of Berta is no mere religious site. It's a chaos gate, a portal between the human world and the netherworld, and Yumel's blood just opened it. The blood of the child of the Covenant. Magnus cries out for his friend, but soon the violent blue energy turns red, then violet, and demons begin pouring out of the portal. Our heroes had no other option but to retreat to a nearby stronghold. The last mission of Chapter 3 starts with a cutscene showing Hugo, Dio, Magnus, and Saradin discussing the calamitous events that just unfolded. They've all come to the realization that the legends are indeed real, that Yumel has acquired the ultimate power, that the Progenitor himself used the power of the Netherworld to bring peace to the kingdom all those years ago. This is probably one of my favorite lines in the game. Dio says, "The legend of the Ogre Battle, that was for reals too?" For reals is a slang term that really dates the game. Saradin explains that the temple is a chaos gate created by the gods, used for interdimensional travel, and far beyond our understanding. Hugo recalls that in the original Ogre Battle, the ogres fought for control of the human world, but there isn't much time for history lessons. We gotta close that chaos gate. And there's just a flood of enemies between you and the temple. Demons, skeletons, cockatrices, black knights, dragons, a full legion, they really throw everything at you. But eventually we make it through to fight the Satiros class demon Decarabia. But as soon as you start the fight, a scene plays showing Destin and Gilbert duking it out with Baldwin and Sir Richard. Destin demands to know their motives behind opening the Chaos Gate. Richard steps up and says they simply plan to use the power of the Netherworld to rule over the weak, to bring order to this chaotic land. He says to Destin, "You are unworthy of our leadership. Dying is your only useful act. There is no place for fools in Utopia." He defends his words, saying his people are under the divine protection of Filler, and therefore deserve to rule over others. He includes the denizens of the Netherworld in his proclamation. He demands that the Zenobians move out of the way, but they refuse. All the men draw their swords, but the scene fades and we don't get to see the battle. That's a pity. Meanwhile, back at the Temple of Berta, Decarabia the demon says we must hold our ground for the coming of our queen. He goes on to say that they must keep the Chaos Gate open to let through as many of their brethren as possible. When Magnus and company arrive, he says, "This time, we will claim this world as our own." Well, if they do, he won't be there to see it. Kenny trots up and crits him for 200 damage, and the battle is over. God almighty, this Dragoon is overpowered as hell. Honestly, after killing so many bosses so fast, I wish you had to at least take out the whole group. But the game really has an odd power curve. You go from being pretty even to absurdly overpowered in the blink of an eye. Like, as soon as you get all of your tier 3 units, it's over. You've won the game, you just haven't gone through the missions yet. With his dying words, Decarabia says that his duty is complete. All that is left is to fill this world with evil. We cut back to the battle from before. A great tremor shakes the earth, confirming to Destin that the Chaos Gate has been destroyed. Hearing this, Richard calls for a retreat. Baldwin teleports away, and Richard throws out a rather insulting spell to Gilbert before teleporting off as well. After the destruction of the Chaos Gate, Archbishop Odoron returned to his original post as the head of the Eastern Orthodox Church and stabilized the region after the appearance of the ogres. The church then put its full support behind the Revolutionary Army. Frederick warned the royal family of the denizens of the Netherworld and proposed that they secede Palatinus from the Holy Lotus Empire and sign a peace accord. Unfortunately, the royal family did not respond, and with that, Chapter 3 of this game comes to a close, and what a freaking banger it was. This is no longer a war against the class system and religious oppression. With the ogres involved, this is a war for all humanity. Old friends have attained the power of demigods, legends have phased out of myth and back into reality. Can Magnus and the Revolutionary Army stop the flood of evil across the land? Can they stop the Caliganus Order? Can they prevent the Ogre Battle? Final chapter. The possible, the attainable, the hopeful. The final chapter begins with a meeting between Sir Richard and a man named Thamuz. They are lamenting the fact that their plan has fallen apart in shambles now that the Chaos Gate at the Temple of Berta has been destroyed. But apparently there's another one at some ruins to the west that they knew about somehow. Richard asks if Thamuz has heard anything from Zeta, who has not been seen since Prince Yumel's disappearance. Thamuz says no, and that she can't be trusted because she's one of them after all, meaning a Netherworlder, which came as quite a shock to me. Apparently they got all their information about the Chaos Gate and the Child of the Covenant from her, so they have no choice but to trust her, even if she eventually betrays them, Richard says. Thamuz tells him that if they screw this up, they'll miss their chance to return the Caliganus Order to its former glory. You see, Richard's father used to be the head of the Caliganus Order of Knights, but during the great coup that saw Pope Saldian take control of Lotus, Richard's father was killed and the prestige of the order was greatly diminished. Thamuz took in Richard and his brother Baldwin after their father's death and raised them. So now we start to see more of Richard and Baldwin's motivations. And suddenly, their meeting is interrupted by a bunch of demons, followed by King Procus and Zeta the Old Crone. I guess that betrayal came sooner than expected. Baldwin is also jumped by a bunch of knights that have fallen to the Infernal Aura, but not just any knights. These are Knights Templar from Lotus, and Baldwin can't believe men such as them could fall to the way of darkness. But Thamuz tells them that the enchantment from the demons is much more powerful than the fruit of the netherworld, and if that's true, the whole of Palatinus is in great danger. As Richard tells Baldwin to escape first, Prince Amrius starts laughing like a madman and the scene fades to black. Meanwhile, Magnus, Frederick, and Hugo are having a meeting with Archbishop Odoron. Odoron explains that the church regrettably cannot help the revolution effort due to how disturbed his people are by the Netherworlders and the suspicion many of the citizens hold against the revolutionary army. He says instead, they will keep guard over the Temple of Berta. The peace accord extended to the royal family still hasn't been answered. And then Magnus speaks up, and oh my goodness, he's back with a haircut and a brand new profile picture. He asks if there is any update on the Radiant Cross from Lotus, and the Valkyrie tells him that the Central Division is now under their complete control, and they're also dealing with a new Balmalkin uprising in the west. Hugo says now's the time to deal with the Central Division and the Caligulus Order, since Lotus is busy with the Balmalkins. Frederick gets a deadly serious look in his eyes. He turns to Magnus and says, "You are the flag bearer of this revolution. The outcome, the fate of this kingdom, is in your hands. Are you willing to take the responsibility?" Magnus says that he doesn't know, but he promises to not look away and face the upcoming battles head on. And with that, Frederick declares that it's time to take the fight to the Radiant Cross and begin in earnest the march on Latium, the capital of Palatinus. "General Gallant is our commander," he says. The final act doesn't just bring a fresh profile pic for our boy, he also levels up as a unit. He can cast a sonic blast from the back row and attacks 3 times from the front row now. I didn't know this until after my first battle, but every time Magnus's class gets updated at the start of each new act, his equipment gets reset back to basic equipment, so be sure to give the man his goods back. One question I do have though, why is this blue sash unable to be removed? Did it belong to someone special? His mother, perhaps? There is scant information about his mother at all in this game, and part of me wonders if the developers were saving that for a sequel. This is the first mission on the way to the capital, and is also the mission where you can recruit Destin and Gilbert if your Chaos Frame score is high enough, but mine was probably not even close. But aside from the Chaos Frame being high enough, you need to have also recruited all of the other Zenobians. Aside from that, Gilbert reveals that someone in the army is betraying them, and if you have a low Chaos Frame, he gives you a good scolding about how you handled all of your battles up to this point, saying you never stopped to empathize with the people. Destin then drops the bomb that they're leaving the front lines of the army so as not to cause confusion on who is really running the show here, which I thought was kind of self-aggrandizing. The final boss is another Templar of the Caligulus Order. He spits out some fiery religious rhetoric that would make a Southern Baptist blush, and then we kill him. GG. Afterward, Hugo confirms that they have a spy among them. There's too much suspicion around how Destin's group was ambushed earlier, and coincidentally the army has lost all contact with Zevik's battalion, the Southern Tigers. Remember him from earlier in the game? He was the one who wanted to use the Balmalkins after freeing them. However, these events play out very differently depending on how you handled the capture of Frederick back at the beginning of the game. So in this playthrough, the traitor ended up being Zevik, and he's the final boss during the mission at Romulus. Zevik thinks that the king and Amrius have attained the ultimate power, so he throws his support behind them in the hopes that together they can all gain independence from Lotus. He asks for you to join him, but that's not going to happen. To his credit, he takes a hit from every frontliner I have and lives, but then succumbs to a combination magic from my backline and dies. But if you fought Dio at the beginning of the game and chose to stay silent during the Frederick hostage scene, you're forced to fight your old friend. And surprise, surprise, he's actually a Dragoon now. Remember, this is the chaotic timeline where Dio kills Sir Raid and then takes his place at the head of the Central Division. He says he wanted to become strong so people would respect him. In an interesting turn of events, he tells you that he killed Zevik for being a traitor, but the fact remains that the revolution must go on, and Dio is in our way. After his defeat, he calls himself a fool and a traitor. Leia is here too, but she just stands there like a mannequin. Magnus offers him one last chance to go with him, as if he doesn't realize the mortal wounds he just inflicted a few seconds ago. With his dying words, Dio says, "I really didn't want to lose to you, Magnus. I wanted to be like you." What a cursed timeline. But it's okay. In my headcanon timeline, he's still alive. Fort Romulus is one of the few pretty cool siege levels. In addition to fighting through groups of enemy troops, you also have to destroy the gates in order to proceed. There aren't any strongholds to take in these levels, but there are gardens where you can stop and rest if you need to. Inside the walls, you'll fight every variety of netherworlders. The royal family will truly stop at nothing to be free of Lotus. Prince Amrius is the final boss here, and you actually have to fight him twice. He glows with the infernal aura and claims to have attained the fabled ultimate power. Magnus tries to tell him that he does not have the ultimate power, and that he's simply fallen to the way of darkness. But Amrius isn't hearing it. He draws his sword in challenge and says, "Fear the power of the royal blood. I am your master. Bow down before me." That's a pretty hard line, but Phase 1 Amrius goes down in one round. But moments later, he uses the power of darkness to summon 4 netherworlders to his side. Alas, it isn't enough to save himself from my god units, and so Amrius, heir to the throne of Palatinus, was defeated. After the mission, Saradin tells Magnus and Hugo about the true nature of darkness from the netherworld, as it was relayed to him by his former master. I'll just go ahead and tell you this now. Rashidi was Saradin's master. He was known as the Sage Rashidi in The March of the Black Queen, and he was one of the primary antagonists of that game. So, just so you're up to speed. This is a pretty big lore dump here. He says a divine being called the Creator made humans from the void, and he gave them infinite potential. He gives the ability to learn magical spells as an example of this. His master was obsessed with the limit of human potential, and in his research he discovered the seal that was put on humans to limit their power. The Creator came to fear what he had made, and put this seal on humans to keep them from attaining godlike power. The effect of breaking this seal causes most humans to be dominated by the infernal aura and become ogres. He says it takes an enormous amount of willpower to not succumb to the aura, and once it happens, there's no reversing the process. Magnus questions how the seal is broken, and Saradin explains that those with a strong infernal aura can break it as they draw out the dark emotions from deep within a person's subconscious mind. By that he means powerful and high-ranking denizens of the netherworld. And this is why ogres being unleashed upon the land is so dangerous. The spread of the infernal aura is a snowball effect that gets increasingly out of control as more fear and chaos spread across the land. Hugo says we have 2 choices. Either immediately take the fight to King Procus at the capital of Latium, or go around to nearby lands helping the people of Palatinus first. This is another huge decision that impacts some of the story events and also your chaos frame. Basically, if you go to Latium first and then do the other missions, your chaos frame will lower by 10 for each mission you do. If you choose to wait to go to Latium, your chaos frame will raise with each subsequent mission. That's a pretty huge swing for this point in the game, and it can make or break the ending you want. It could also be smart to make a save file here if you want to tank your chaos frame or raise it at the last second to take advantage of these huge swings. It also changes the boss encounters for some of the missions and determines whether or not you can recruit Karth the Black Knight. I can't imagine the conversations that went on about this game's story on release. So many different paths, so many variances, and who you recruit and what ending you get. With so little information on how the mechanics worked, it must have been thrilling to see something wildly different happen on multiple playthroughs. In this particular save file, I chose to help the people first. As soon as you start this mission, you get a scene of King Procus being warned of the approaching revolutionary army. His title has now changed to King Procus the Mad, interestingly enough. Moments later, Prince Yumel appears from a portal of darkness along with his retinue of badass-looking knights. Procus demands to know who these mystery knights are that have trespassed into his halls. Yumel explains that he's discovered the secret behind his birth, his destiny. He knows why his hair and eye color differ from that of his father's. He claims to have the ultimate power, and demands his father's obedience. Of course, King Procus thinks that he has the ultimate power, just like Prince Amrius. Everyone has the ultimate power. Procus says that Yumel doesn't have proof that he's a member of the royal family anyway, and blames him for the death of his mother who died during childbirth. He's really giving him the Tyrion Lannister treatment here. He commands a nearby paladin to kill Yumel, but one of Yumel's knights just deletes him from existence. Not kidding, that's actually what it looks like. "These are my knights," Yumel says. "The Knights of Danica." Procus is stunned by this revelation, and Yumel asks for assistance with his divine plan. The next few missions mostly just showcase the effect of the infernal aura across the land of Palatinus, and not much story advancement, so I'll just talk about a few things of note and then move on. At the end of the next mission, there's kind of a funny meeting with Hugo, Magnus, and one of their scouts. He says he's only been able to gather rumors, and then gives highly specific information about Yumel. King Procus isn't in power. An entity called the Child of the Covenant is actually in control. The denizens of the netherworld hope to resurrect their queen, the demi-goddess Danica. Hugo pipes up and says he's heard legends that say Danica was taken to the netherworld once, but never that she was the queen. Luckily, this random scout has all the answers. He says there's a story that Danica ate the fruit of the netherworld, and so her body and soul were filled with darkness. But he doesn't know why the demons are cooperating with this Child of the Covenant, and by extension, Latium. The scout says apparently he has a divine plan, which includes stopping the revolution, destroying Lotus, and the creation of a new world where he will rule over both humans and demons. Oh, and we've located Prince Yumel. The scout kind of hints that he knows Yumel is the child of the Covenant as well. Get this guy a fucking raise, man. He just put the whole story together. At this point, I had progressed far enough in the story to unlock the princess unit, which was just too powerful to pass up. If you make her a group leader, she gives every other unit in her group an extra attack. So dragoons and paladins would have 4 attacks, which is probably more than you would ever need, but it's still pretty cool. Just don't be like me and throw her in a group thinking that's enough to trigger the extra attacks. I ran that setup for like 5 missions before I figured out that didn't work. She has to be the group leader. Luckily, unlocking the princess isn't quite as lengthy of a process as getting the dragoon. The 4 items you need are a spellbook, a battle fan, a pure white dress, and a dream tiara. But the last 2 are the only items that require quests. The first thing you have to do is send a female-led group to Bordeaux in the Ten of Plains, and you'll get information on what's needed to make a pure white dress. Then you have to go to Melfi in Dardanelles on the 15th of the month, and you can buy a bolt of silk between 9 and 1800 hours. Then you take the silk back to the Ten of Plains to the town of Bilney, and a tailor there will make the pure white dress for you. After you finish the Blue Basilica mission, which is what I just did, you can send a unit to Clemona where you'll meet a sad old man who is pining for an old lost love. He tells you that he promised her he would give up his title and run off to live with her in the south, but he wasn't able to keep his promise because he feared the life of a peasant. And on the day they had planned to meet, his father showed up in his place and he ran her off. The old man says he knows it's too late, but he wants to apologize for what he did. He gives you a jewelry box and asks you to give it to a woman named Gilda if you ever run into her. In Crennel Canyon, in the town of Boolem, pretty cool town name, you will learn that Gilda moved to a town called El near the Zenobian border. So you go to El, and some random old guy there will tell you that she got sick and moved in with her daughter's family somewhere in the region of Sawathan. It ends up being the town of Trissel, but sadly you only meet her granddaughter, who tells you she passed away a few years ago. So Magnus tells this poor girl all about her grandmother's past, and then she gives you a letter from Gelda addressed to the old man who sent you on this goose chase to begin with. He cries a little bit when you give him the letter, but then tells you to keep the jewelry box. He says it contains the dream tiara, which enables females to change into the princess class. I thought that was kind of a funny switch up between a sad old man and an NPC tutorial guy. I ended up picking Katreda to be my princess unit for RP reasons, the daughter of an imprisoned old war hero joining a revolution and rising up the ranks to become a princess. Seemed as good of a reason as any other. If you do the mission at Patia before Latium, you can recruit Karth the Black Knight as long as you have a chaos frame below 29 and also have not recruited any of the Zenobians. If you go to Toribni, you'll run into Karth in the woods. He's in the midst of a battle frenzy after fighting off a bunch of netherworlders and he's near death. He tells you just to stay out of his way and he takes off for the final stronghold. Pretty badass. If he survives the mission, he'll offer to join your group if you meet the requirements, and in this case, a Mazaroth would be the final boss. However, if you go to Latium before this mission, Karth will be the final boss instead and you can't recruit him. If he lives in your timeline, after the mission he'll tell you about how he used to be a member of the Caliganus Order. He was at the Battle of the Temple of Bertha when he discovered what the true intentions of the mission were, and he could no longer cooperate with such madness. It went against the teaching of his god Feller, and he plans to go back to Lotus and spread his message. I really like Karth because even through all his suffering and the shattering of his worldview, he was able to resist the infernal aura and retain his humanity. The scariest thing about the mission at Barpeth is that the final boss is a Gorgon, which has an attack called Gaze of Terror that can petrify the entire party in one turn. Luckily, Magnus and my paladin resisted the attack, or that would have lost me like 45 minutes of my life. But she gives some good lore on defeat. Magnus asks how she can work alongside humans, thinking that the Netherworlders' hate would be too strong for them to cooperate, but she says they endure for their queen. Apparently Danica can only be awoken by a human of royal blood. She tells Magnus that Danica and the royal family share the same blood, that they are related. She also drops Jiglia's bow, which has a chance to petrify enemies, and I honestly think it's one of the most overpowered weapons in the game. Give this to a Diana if you have one. Next, I went to Argent, where Leah's father Count Silvus rules the land. If you go here before Latium, a lich called Rusharl will be the final boss. After you fight him, if you still have Leia in your battalion, she will confront the lich over the supposed murder of her father, but the lich corrects her, saying he took his own life so that he wouldn't succumb to the infernal aura. If you went to Latium first, apparently Count Silvus is the final boss and you have to fight him. There's a scene where Leia holds her dying father in her arms, but I did never get it, and sadly couldn't find any footage of it online. The last mission before you get to Latium is a little disturbing. A high-ranking demon named From has taken over the area, but according to Hugo, the land is rather peaceful until you arrive. From says he's there to grant the wishes of humans, to create an ideal world where no one is bound to anyone else. After his defeat, he talks of how everyone in the Netherworld is free, that the only law is strength. He says humans are foolish to quarrel with each other, while the Netherworlders take over the land. But strangely, right before he dies, he says he wishes he could have lived in comfort the way humans do. So these aren't mindless evil abominations just out here doing evil for the sake of evil. There appears to be humanity in the ogres, just as we've seen ogre-like traits in many humans in the story. And finally, I made it to Latium, but before the battle, a cutscene plays showing Yumel as a child alone in the castle. Ankaseth arrives with a young Magnus following behind him. They introduce themselves. Time flashes forward and shows the two playing in the courtyard. Yumel says one day he'll grow up to be a king, and Magnus will be his knight. Time moves forward again, and we finally see the assassination attempt on Prince Yumel in full. A nobleman pulls a knife and goes for the prince, but Magnus gets in his way, stalling him. The man knocks Magnus to the ground, then Ankaseth runs in and cuts the man down. Yumel goes to check on Magnus, who says he hates himself for not being strong enough to save Yumel on his own. Then we see a replay of the scene from the opening of the game where Magnus is leaving for the military academy, and then we see these are actually Magnus's memories. Hugo snaps him out of his flashback to give him the battle plan for the assault on Latium. Right off the bat, there are 3 enemy legions making their way directly toward the base. I already had pretty strong units, but now my wizard has the Book of Annihilation, which is one of the powerful Draconite spells that can basically win the game for you even if you have nothing else. It hits the entire enemy team and does an absurd amount of damage. You can actually buy the book in Alba if you have enough money, but it costs quite a lot for a good reason. Or you can wait until the Barpeth mission and find one in the southwest of Sondrio for free. Once again, things play out differently here based on mission completion order. If you've done the Lord of Remus Keep mission already, there will be 2 separate Knights of Danica here that you have to fight first. If not, they'll just be normal paladins. But they also have 4 Satiros class demons with them, and they never say they're protecting Prince Yumel. In fact, they never mention Yumel at all. They only say they're protecting Lady Danica, and to stop tormenting her and serve her. They were actually pretty tough even with my beefed up units. I guess they have really high defense or something. After you beat both knights, Magnus will question a random enemy soldier about this divine plan he keeps hearing about. The soldier explains that the legend of the Progenitor will be repeated. Yumel is going to use a forbidden spell to destroy all the enemies of Palatinus and bring peace to the land once more. Then a scene plays showing Yumel in a dark room, staring out of a window. He laughs to himself, looking every bit like a villain whose grand unstoppable plan is nearly complete. Behind him, the old crone Zeta appears with Mary trailing behind her. The scene fades to black. So mission 37 is very interesting. It's another siege mission, and apparently you can have King Procus as the first boss fight here if you made certain decisions throughout the game, but I didn't get that fight. The guide I was following for my second playthrough didn't mention the fight either. Even the Ogre Battle 64 Archives website didn't have concrete information on exactly how to trigger this fight. They suggested that it had something to do with whether or not you chose to make peace with the Western Division back at the end of Chapter 2. But luckily, there is video evidence that it's real. If anyone knows exactly what to do or has any theories, I'd love to hear them. But this is just yet another example of how good the replay value is for this game. There's just so much to discover. But no matter what happens, Procus escapes and goes to confront Prince Yumel. He asks why the forbidden spell hasn't been cast yet. Yumel, now known as King Yumel the Chosen, says he can't cast it yet because Magnus is on his way. That's really sweet. Then he grows annoyed with his father's ramblings and zaps him out of existence. Afterward, Magnus enters the throne room to confront his oldest friend. Yumel tells Magnus that he's gained the ultimate power, and he's going to change the world. He's going to rule over both the humans and the netherworld. He asks Magnus to join him, saying only he is worthy to serve him. I will reign over the entire world, and you will be my knight, he says. A nice callback to the beginning of the game. Magnus accuses him of succumbing to the darkness, but Yumel corrects him, saying the power of the Progenitor that he has acquired is different. He says whoever stands in his way will be killed, but that he didn't cast the forbidden spell because he was waiting for Magnus. But Magnus defies him, saying he can't stand by and let Yumel go through with this. And that's when Yumel's false mask of composed divinity crumbles. I won't forgive you, Magnus. No one defies me and lives. And with that, he summons his remaining Knights of Danica, and the battle begins. Unfortunately for him, not even his remaining knights and his newfound ultimate power are enough to save him from my squad. Mary runs into the room as Yumel kneels on the ground defeated. She tells Magnus to back away and starts to explain his relationship to Danica when Yumel tells her to stop so he can explain instead. He says, I was the child of the Covenant. He explains that after Danica was tricked into becoming the Queen of the Netherworld, her mother, the goddess Berta, divided her body into 5 parts and imprisoned her deep within the earth. Her arms and legs changed form into the Knights of Danica, who became keepers of the Chaos Gate and watched over the Netherworld. Separated from her body, her soul went into a deep sleep, and years later, by chance, the Progenitor came across the Chaos Gate and met the Knight of Danica there who guarded it. In exchange for the ultimate power, he made a pact with the Knight, and the pact was to give up one of his descendants to Danica. That descendant turned out to be Yumel. Magnus is in pure disbelief over these revelations, but Yumel continues. He said Danica slept for years, but yearned to be awoken, but she needed a body to be able to resurrect. Yumel reveals that he is that body. He wields the power of Danica, which means that he was never human. But even so, he's grateful to have lived the life that he did, that he was able to have a friend like Magnus. Magnus says it's not too late to start over, and Yumel seems to consider it for a moment. But Mary starts to lose it. She walks behind Yumel, drawing a sword. She's afraid he's going to leave her. Magnus tells Yumel to step away, but Yumel waves him off. He tells Mary that they can leave right now, together, but Mary isn't having it. She says, "He's mine. No one else can have him." And then she stabs him. Yumel collapses into Magnus's arms as Mary panics over what she has done. Then Zeta appears behind her, admonishing Mary for letting her emotions get the best of her. She says now that Yumel is dying, and that Mary is her last hope. She grabs her and disappears. Magnus asks Yumel if he's alright, but he only answers with a warning. He says now that the Knights of Danica are destroyed, when he dies, the only thing stopping Danica from being resurrected is the seal at the ruins. Magnus tells him that's not important, that he needs to stop moving. But Yumel continues. He says Danica is an unstable being, a demigoddess, and the queen of the Netherworld. If she returns, the battle against the Netherworlders will spread across the world. Ogre Battle, Magnus says. Yumel tells him to hurry, and to promise to come back. Promise me that you'll come back to me, he says. You are my knight. And with those final words, Yumel slips away. With iron in his voice, Magnus makes one final promise to his old friend, to make the world the way he wished it to be. When next the curtain lifts, yet another meeting is taking place with Magnus, Hugo, and Frederick. The revolution is over, but a more threatening conflict is on the horizon, a war for humanity. Ogre Battle must be stopped, Magnus says. We have to protect this land, this world that Yumel loved. All the members of the Sex Havers feel the same, Hugo says. They ask Frederick to approve their leave, for they have battles to fight elsewhere. He approves on the condition that they both come back alive. And so the hunt is on for Richard, Baldwin, Zeta, and Mary to stop the resurrection of Danica and prevent the Ogre Battle. So once you complete the mission at the Aurora Plains, it renders any other previous missions unplayable. So this is the point of no return for the final chapter. The end is near. A cutscene shows Zeta dragging Mary along by the wrist, but Mary is too grief-stricken to carry on. Zeta gets frustrated and acts as if she's about to do something sinister when an off-screen voice catches her attention. A seal made by a god can't be broken by a denizen of the Netherworld. Isn't that so? The voice belonged to Richard, who appears with Baldwin and Thamuz at his side. Nervously, Zeta offers to make a deal with them. She offers contact with a god in exchange for help breaking the seal at the ruins. She says that the reason she betrayed them last time was because the Chaos Gate was destroyed, and the only way to resurrect Danica was to trick and use the royal family. Richard says he's done with excuses. They want the ultimate power, and they force her to come with them. Before the mission, Hugo says that hordes of demons have been spotted heading to some ruins at the base of Mount Kyriolith. Magnus suspects correctly that this is where Danica is buried. There's not much to be said about the mission here. No unlockable characters or anything, just standard combat. But the final boss is Thamuz. Magnus slams the Caligulous Order, asking how they could possibly side with the Netherworlders. But Thamuz says the ranks of the Order have been decimated and that they can't return to Lotus in their current state. Baldwin says they'll gain the ultimate power and use it to return to the top of the Imperial Knights and get revenge on those who murdered his father during the coup. Magnus tells them the ultimate power is not meant for humans, and Thamuz tells Baldwin to run and head for the ruins. Thamuz then pulls a Gandalf and tells us he will not let us pass, before taking up the greatest defensive position I've seen a final boss take in this entire game. No wonder this guy survived so long. Even so, it bought him an extra round of life, nothing more. With his dying breath, he says farewell to Richard and Baldwin, and the two men he raised from childhood. Afterward, Hugo informs Magnus that the Caligulous Order has made their headquarters at Castle Talpia. He says we need to attack the castle to avoid our backs being exposed at the ruins, and that supposedly there's more information about the ruins to be found there. So the chase is on. Baldwin arrives at Castle Talpia to tell Richard about the death of Thamuz. Richard is infuriated at this audience. Apparently Baldwin was supposed to be making preparations to fight Magnus's army instead. He dismisses Baldwin, then speaking aloud to himself reveals his plan to have Baldwin be the recipient of the ultimate power and then take leadership of the Caligulous Order. He says, "Watch over us, Thamuz. I will join you soon." Pretty cryptic. This is kind of a fun mission because you're immediately attacked by enemies on all sides, so if you only have one or two good groups, this battle is going to be pretty tough. Baldwin is the final boss here, and he greets you outside the gates of the castle. After my princess condemns Baldwin for their use of netherworlders in the war, he says there really isn't much difference between us and them, and that he'll never forgive us for killing Thamuz. He draws his sword and the battle begins. To his credit, he lasted a full 3 rounds, but my units were largely unfazed. He curses us for beating him, and then he does that annoying, infuriating teleport maneuver again. Richard is furious with Baldwin for not being able to stop the army. He orders Baldwin to head for the ruins, and that he will stop the army here at the castle instead. Baldwin leaves without saying anything. I don't know why, but it really seemed like Richard was intentionally being an over-the-top asshole here. Is this where he was planning on sacrificing himself? I'm still not sure why he thought he would die soon, or that he needed to die at all. Anyway, this is another siege mission, and it goes just about like the others, except there are more doors to break down, and they actually send a few groups outside of the walls to fuck with you. When you face off against Richard, he seems mildly surprised that your army could fare so well against the Caligulous Order. Magnus calls him out, asking if he has any idea what resurrecting Danica will do. Would they really start the Ogre Battle just to attain their own goals? Richard confirms this. The ends justify the means. It's all for the greater good. With the ultimate power, we will build a new, perfect world, he says. He says worthless fools rule the land only because of their lineage, and he thinks Magnus should agree with him since he spent 90% of the game trying to overthrow the nobles of Palatinus to destroy the class system. It is difficult to practice ideals while you seek a better path. The world continues to degrade, Richard says. That's a fascinating line to me because it suggests that he understands how Magnus is thinking. Maybe he was also a young idealist that tried to do everything the right way. And over time, he realized nothing changed. He didn't have enough power. At what point does the power you need to make meaningful change end up consuming you? I was glad to see that he had 2 venerable dragons fighting with him for a guy they call the Dragonheart, but sadly they didn't get a chance to attack. At this point, I was honestly considering doing a fighter and archer and main character only run, just to see if it's still this easy. Unsurprisingly, Richard stands back up and teleports away after mumbling to himself a bit. Moments later, he meets up with Baldwin in the woods. He loses his patience, wondering why he's still here. He tells him to hurry up and go break the seal, but Baldwin is fed up. He's tired of being told what to do. He turns, walks slowly up to Richard, and draws his sword. And Richard, with the slowest reaction time of any human I've ever seen, takes a sword straight to the gut. Baldwin wasn't just upset with the way Richard treated him, but that he seemingly was not upset at all when Thamuz died, which isn't true as we know. He says he won't let Richard have the ultimate power. I will become a god, he says. A tragic misunderstanding, because Richard's whole plan was to give it to Baldwin and have him lead their order. And I'm not entirely sure Richard dies here. He never really falls to the ground, and that's how they've communicated most deaths in the game. Maybe he'll come back in the sequel, any day now. But as far as we're concerned, that's the last we will see of Richard the Dragonheart. Such a well done and complex villain. And now for Mount Kyriolith, the final mission. First, we are treated to a scene with Baldwin, Zeta, and Mary arriving at the ruins where Danica is buried. Zeta can feel the power of the infernal aura in the air. Baldwin seems doubtful that Mary has the power to resurrect Danica, but Zeta assures him that she can. She says Mary is now a mindless puppet, driven mad over the loss of Prince Yumel. Suddenly, a knight appears telling Baldwin that the sex havers are approaching. After he leaves, Zeta produces that peculiar sword and tells Mary to summon Danica with it. Mary just stares blankly at the blade. Zeta grows frustrated, saying that even if she doesn't know what to do, that the blood she inherited from him should instinctively tell her how to complete the ritual. Then Mary snaps out of her catatonic state. She says if she knew the words, she still wouldn't summon Danica. She tells Zeta that her time is over. Panicking, Zeta says, "This isn't for us, it's for your father." This confuses Mary because she's been led to believe that she doesn't have a father. But Zeta says, and this is very important, "The reason why you were born, your feelings toward Yumel, and the fact that you're here with me right now, all these were according to your father's plan. This is the fate prepared for you by your father, who was the Sage of Zetagenia, the fate given to you for you to follow." They never mention his name, but her father is Rashidi, one of the primary antagonists of the March of the Black Queen, who was killed by Destin and company. This understandably upsets Mary very much. Zeta goes on to say that even Yumel's destiny and his love for Mary was also planned. And so Mary takes the sword and stabs her in the gut, bringing her KD ratio to 2/0. Yumel's theme begins playing as Mary makes her way to the ruins. She starts calling out for Yumel, as if she can feel his presence. In her despair, she strikes the ground with the sword over and over. A crack forms and a bright blue light explodes from it. Exhausted, she crumbles to the ground as an ethereal figure appears before her. In the final battle plan of the game, Magnus ponders whether his actions thus far have been right. He wonders if his decisions led to Yumel and the Empire being dragged into this war, and it's kind of one of the ways the game has you reflect on your decisions as well, hinting that things could be different if you go back through and alter some of your choices. And he's probably thinking of the conversation he had with Raid back in chapter 2 or 3. Those words are probably haunting him. Hugo tells him not to worry about it. What's done is done, and all they can do now is keep pushing forward. Baldwin is the first boss you fight at the end of the map, but like a very professional YouTuber, I forgot to record the beginning of the mission, so I only have like half of his speech here. He curses the Sex Havers for interfering with his plan once again, and Magnus declares that Baldwin's evil scheming ends here. Danica will not be resurrected, but Baldwin has a surprise for him. He says he's only resurrecting her to gain the ultimate power, and then he plans to kill her. Magnus thinks he's a fool and that this task is surely impossible. Baldwin says that since Danica is merely a demigoddess, that she's probably not immortal. Probably. He intends to become a legend and be remembered as a god. Magnus says the ultimate power isn't meant for humans, and that it can only create chaos. But Baldwin says he plans to eliminate chaos entirely. He thinks that this is how heroes and gods were born in ages past. Rejoice, Baldwin says. A new hero is born from the ashes of your dead. He puts up a decent fight, managing to dodge some of my attacks and actually living through all 3 rounds of combat, but he survives and teleports back to the ruins. In the next scene, we see Zeta turn into her true form, a Gorgon from the Netherworld. She crawls toward Baldwin and mutters that the time has come for Danica, their goddess, to awaken. Then she melts away like the Wicked Witch of the West. As Baldwin approaches the ruins, he sees Mary staring up at the resurrected goddess Danica. He's afraid she's after the ultimate power, so he draws his sword and cuts her down. She cries out for Yumel, then goes silent. Then Baldwin, hands raised in the air in reverence, calls out to Danica. My goddess Danica, I'm the one who awakened you. Bless me. Grant me the ultimate power. Suddenly, Magnus arrives to stop this madness, and with a flick of her wrist, Danica tosses Baldwin to the side. Interestingly, Magnus mistakes Danica for Yumel for a moment, then comes to his senses. As she slowly floats toward Magnus to speak with him, you can hear Yumel's theme start playing in the background. She tells him that she is indeed Danica, daughter of a human king and the goddess of the earth. She says she was once known as the goddess of fertility, but Magnus only knows her as the queen of the Netherworld. Danica says she knows Magnus through her connection with Yumel, and that's when he notices that her hair and eye color are the exact same as Yumel's. She then tells Magnus the full story of her descent into darkness. It all started with a mistake. After being enticed by Damunza, king of the Netherworld, into eating the fruit of the Netherworld, my mother put me in a deep sleep. So I would not succumb to the infernal aura. My soul was separated from my body, and I went into a deep slumber. I was never to awaken unless I was summoned, as long as people did not want me to return as a god. A man who yearned for my power. His heart woke me. He yearned for power to protect his beloved. I gave him my blessing, my power, and demanded reparation, to offer me a vessel so that I can fully awaken. A vessel? Magnus asked. Danica continued. As I made contact with his feelings, I felt my own loneliness. My heart was filled with sorrow. I could not bear to be alone. My desire to reawaken being strong, I demanded a vessel to hold my soul. I don't know what happened to him after the covenant was made, except the person you hold close to your heart was the vessel, the child of the covenant. The sword, the token of the covenant, accepted his blood, and my knights obeyed his commands. When his heart came down to me, I felt him. I felt his deep sorrow. I did not want to wake up. I was filled with unbearable sadness. He's been suffering by himself. As Danica's words trail off, Baldwin stirs back to life. His rage starts to build. This was supposed to be his power. This was supposed to be his world. But Danica, being sensitive to the strong, negative emotions of those around her, holds her head and starts to scream. The infernal aura bursts from her body. She starts to gather immense power, and the instability of this divine and unholy being is made manifest before you. She starts talking to herself, or perhaps they are her own thoughts, but they soon become mixed with Yumel's thoughts as well. Somehow he still has sentience through his attachment to the demigoddess. The words flash by quickly, but some of them are bone-chilling. Be one with the gods. Ah, the ultimate power is mine. What have I done? I won't accept it. No, fools, you must not be awoken. My brother, all according to plan. Get out of here, Magnus. Consumed by the infernal aura, the angelic demigoddess of fertility is gone. This is Danica, queen of the Netherworld, a demonic, grotesque perversion of nature with freaking Venus flytraps for arms. All living beings worship me, she says, and the battle begins. One of the arms throws out acid spit, 100 damage to my wizard, 80 to my center paladin. Lava shot to my wizard again. He's got 34 hit points left, and I'm wondering if I'm cooked here. I just spent the last 15 hours talking shit about how easy this game was, and now this happens? She's got 531 health. Lava shot to my priest. She's almost dead. My frontliners attack. Barely over 100 damage combined. She's got high defense. Great. My wizard casts Annihilation, but she's resistant to it and only takes 60 damage. Not good. 2 more spells to my wizard, and he's dead. He's dead. I thought he was immortal. But we make it through 3 rounds of combat and retreat. For now, take a moment to enjoy this sick-ass final boss music. If I had to put a name to the feeling this theme captured, it would be Biblical Doom. So good. As soon as we retreat, an army of demons starts spawning from 2 portals of darkness nearby. At this point, the demons will continue to spawn and attack you indefinitely until you die, so it's best to hurry and head directly for Danica once more. The second time I fought her, it went much better. My wizard almost died, but we got the job done. The world is saved. After the battle, Danica reappears with her much nicer personality. She thanks Magnus for stopping her, and he asks her if she truly was the Queen of the Netherworld. She responds, "Both good and evil reside within my heart, and as both God and human, I continually sway between the 2 sides. I become the Queen of the Netherworld when my heart is filled with hatred, and peace of mind makes me the god of fertility. Which side I take depends on the consciousness that emanates from this world. Do you realize I am just like you? Both you and the denizens of the Netherworld share the same origin. Humans live on fertile lands, while the ogres live in the wastelands controlled by hatred. That is the only difference. You are even more unstable than I. You are human and ogre at the same time. That is why it is possible for the ogre battle to occur without the influence of the Netherworld. As humans fight among themselves and hate each other, Son of Man, it is not by accident that Yumel was selected as my vessel. This was all planned by someone with formidable power. Be careful. He, and the creator of chaos, is born of this land. The ogre battle cannot be avoided. Be careful, Son of Man." And then with a soft twinkle of green light, she fades away, returning to her slumber. Yumel, our battle is over. The ending to this game is dependent on your Chaos Frame score, but certain cutscenes can vary based on what characters you recruited, and especially whether or not you recruited any Zenobians. Going over every variable and every ending would be a multi-hour video all on its own, so I'll just go over the 3 general endings you can get, as well as one special case where you can play a secret last mission. First, I'll go over what I call the neutral ending, which is what I got in this playthrough with a Chaos Frame of 45. Magnus meets back up with Frederick at the capital, and he thanks him for his great efforts in stopping both the Central Division and the Netherworlders. If you recruited Destin, this conversation takes place with him instead, but basically plays out the same. But he says the revolution is not over yet. There's still work to be done in this new world. Magnus says he doesn't know where to go from here because he only knows how to fight. He wants to bring peace and happiness to the people, but he needs Frederick to teach him how. The old man agrees. Magnus wonders aloud if Palatinus is still fated to fall, just like Yumel was fated to fall. But Frederick says it wasn't fate that killed Prince Yumel, but the result of his decisions and the path that he chose. Only a man's own frailties determine his fate. The sum of his actions cannot be considered fate. 6 months later, Frederick was crowned the King of Palatinus, and he was a king for the people. He never sat on the throne, and later became known as King Frederick the Benevolent, which is a nice callback to Ankaseth's speech to Magnus in the forest. A few years later, in a battle against barbarian tribes to the east, Frederick is killed, and the kingship was passed to his right-hand man, which turns out not to be Magnus in this case. I actually don't know who it was in this ending. Then you get a few scenes dependent upon who you recruited, but they all seem to have one thing in common. All of the characters are gathering once again for a great battle. In Europa's scene, she and Vad are preparing for a battle against the Lotus Empire. And if you unlocked Destin, it will be him in this scene instead, but Magnus and friends have another foe. My final scene showed Magnus giving a speech with Ankaseth and Archbishop Odoron by his side. Dio and Leah are in the crowd along with some knights. He says they will mourn Frederick's death, but will not let their hearts be filled with hatred, that your true adversary lies within yourself. Don't ever lose sight of your humanity. He draws his sword and declares that they will win their future. In closing, we are told that Magnus came to be known far and wide for his exploits in battle. He thwarted invasions of the eastern barbarian tribes. He was known by all as a paragon of chivalry. As a knight, he pledged allegiance to no one, not even his king. If you wait for the credits to end, the game will tell you exactly what your chaos frame was, as well as the amount of in-game days you played. In this case, I had 45 out of 100 chaos frame and 1,933 days played. In a high chaos frame ending, Frederick still dies in battle, but Magnus succeeds him as king this time. He succeeds in defending the country from the eastern barbarian tribes and is remembered as a great king, both in strength and wisdom, and his legacy is carried on by his son, Prince Undius Gallant. The chaotic ending is where things get interesting. If you manage to keep your chaos frame low enough and also do not recruit any Zenobians during your playthrough, you unlock a secret mission called Caliber. After defeating Danica, on your way back to Latium to meet up with Frederick, your battalion is intercepted by a very formidable and familiar foe. Hugo says the last words the scout said to him were, "We've seen armies, the likes of which God has never seen." And he's right. This mission has the toughest groups and units in the game by far. You'll fight high-level Sphinxes, Angel Knights, Seraphs, Paladins, even Dragoons. If you manage to battle through all of them, all 5 Zenobians will be waiting for you at the last base with groups of their own. In this ending, Magnus, from the perspective of the Zenobians, is a bloodthirsty warlord who can only solve problems through violence. Perhaps they thought he wouldn't be satisfied with no war left to fight and would turn his gaze to Zenobia next. Perhaps they thought he had succumbed to the infernal aura. Debonair will say he doesn't want to fight, but must fulfill his knightly duty. Upon defeat, he says his only regret was not being able to stop you. Gilbert will say that your youth is no excuse for the decisions you've made. When defeated, he uses his last words to say sorry to someone named Canopus, who is a character from a few other Ogre Battle games. Another nice touch for veterans of the series. Saradin accuses you of choosing the easy path, using only strength to achieve your goals. He expected more from you. His dying words are, "Will this world come to an end, just as my master said?" Aisha will ask why you couldn't think of other people, and that it's a pity you could only think of yourself. When she dies, she tells her dead mom that the time has come to see her again. Look at Magnus out here reuniting families. There's always a silver lining. Destin rolls into battle with 2 venerable dragons. He tells Magnus to surrender to them, that it isn't too late yet. Magnus asks why the Zenobians are treating them this way, and Destin tells him to reflect on what he's done, how he only focused on winning battles instead of caring for the people. He says you're no different than those who exercise power over the weak. People just want a leader, a person of lordly caliber. Destin says as long as he believes in the rule of might, he cannot let him return to Latium. But once defeated, he has a few more words to say. "You've become quite strong, Magnus. I can't stop you anymore. From here, only a path of thorns lies ahead of you, and that is the path you chose. Be true to yourself and move on." Then he collapses, and Magnus hangs his head in sorrow. Once you return to the capital, a group of soldiers stops Magnus outside of the throne room. They think he's fallen to the way of darkness and succumbed to the infernal aura. Magnus can't believe it. They say he's no different than the Netherworlders. All of them draw their blades, and Magnus is forced to leave. A few years later, the barbarian tribes to the east invade Palatinus, kill Frederick, and destroy the entire kingdom. During this time, Magnus Gallant disappeared, and his name was forgotten forever. But that's not all. After the credits, there's one more cutscene. Remember Karakov? Well, he stumbles upon the body of Mary Callan lying in the road somewhere, and this probably happens before the barbarians invade. Suddenly, her dress starts shifting around, and a baby crawls out from under her and levitates into the air. It has purple hair and red eyes, so sometime before Yumel's tragic death, he and Mary conceived a child. The infant glows with infernal aura and kills Karakov. Then it speaks with the voice of an old man. "This is the 4th time I've reincarnated. Ha 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 ha. So this is the power of a god. This is the body that I've been searching for so long. Now I can begin." How metal is that? This child is the reincarnation of the sage Rashidi, the mastermind behind the plot to resurrect Danica. Except now, he has the blood of gods. Rather terrifying, honestly. In my headcanon, I like to combine this ending with the lawful ending as well. So, Magnus would be crowned king, but this child would still be born, and would possibly contend with Magnus's son Aeneas down the road. But as of yet, we don't know what happens, because this game is as far as the lore in the world of Ogre Battle goes. Square Enix is the owner of the IP, and while they've semi-recently remastered Tactics Ogre, nothing else has been done with the series, and that's really a shame. This is a franchise that doesn't deserve to die. And there are still thousands of hardcore fans out there that would love a continuation of the story if done tastefully in the spirit of the old games. I went into this game expecting to like it, but I freaking loved it. Unlike my playthrough of Aidyn Chronicles earlier this year, I wasn't motivated by nostalgia. The game simply hooked me with its fun RPG mechanics, a surprisingly deep and heartfelt story, and insane replay value with multiple hidden characters and branching story paths. I'm definitely going to play the other games in the series at some point, and I'll probably start with March of the Black Queen. Still, I do wish the game was a little bit more difficult, and that the final bosses at the end of each mission were a little tougher. It got to a point where I was purely driven by the story to keep playing, which is fine, but in a tactical RPG, I would prefer to spend most of my time, considering my tactics. If you thought this looked good but want something modern, I suggest you look into Unicorn Overlord. I haven't actually played it, but people in the comments of my community post brought it up, and users all over Reddit keep saying it's the spiritual successor to Ogre Battle. There's yet another game on the backlog. I really appreciate everyone who made it this far and put up with my yapping. If you liked the video, consider giving it a like and subscribe for more videos similar to this one in the future. I'm not sure yet which game I'm going to cover next, so feel free to give suggestions in the comments. I do really appreciate it when people leave comments, such as these from my Aidyn Chronicles video. Like this guy, who said, if I open a video and see a long-haired guy with bad posture hunching forward and using his hair as drapes that he's constantly peeking through, I know I'm in for a banger of a video. Or this guy, who said, terrible game, just awful. Or this guy, who said, no one played it because it sucked ass. I appreciate the feedback, gentlemen. But anyway, until next time, my friends, take care and farewell, wherever you may fare.